Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Daniel Reeves, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023. I should have known better than to go hiking alone in Shimek State Forest. The locals in Farmington had warned me, not directly, but in those sidelong glances and sudden silences when I mentioned I'd be spending a week exploring the remote southern trails. I dismissed their concerns as small-town superstition, the kind that develops when people spend generations living beside dark woods. Just stick to the marked paths, the elderly clerk at the general store had said, sliding my supplies across the counter with a trembling hand. And be out before sunset. The forest changes after dark. I'd smiled politely, paid for my supplies, and walked out thinking I knew better. I was an experienced hiker from Colorado, used to far more challenging terrain than Iowa's gentle woodlands. What could possibly lurk in Shimek that would frighten someone who'd survived a blizzard on the Continental Divide? I would soon learn exactly what. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I'd set up my tent at a designated campsite near Croton, using it as a base for day hikes through the forest's winding trails. The autumn colors were magnificent, vibrant reds and oranges painting the forest canopy, the occasional golden sunbeam piercing through to illuminate patches of forest floor in ethereal light. I filled my camera's memory card with shots of deer paths, unusual fungi formations, and ancient oak trees whose gnarled trunks spoke of centuries standing sentinel over these lands. On the third day, I decided to venture farther from the established trails. I'd spotted what appeared to be an old logging road on my topographical map, one that wound deeper into the forest toward the Des Moines River. According to my research, there were remnants of abandoned homesteads scattered throughout the area, relics from the 19th century when settlers had tried and failed to tame this wild corner of Iowa. The morning dawned cool and misty. I packed light, just water, protein bars, my camera, and a small first aid kit. The logging road was overgrown but still visible, a narrow corridor cutting through increasingly dense vegetation. As I walked, the sounds of the forest seemed to change. The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied my previous hikes gradually diminished until I realized I was walking in near silence, my footsteps on the leaf-strewn ground the only sound breaking the stillness. 3 hours in, I came across the first homestead, or what remained of it. Just a crumbling stone foundation, a collapsed chimney, and the rusted skeleton of what might have been a plow. I was photographing an unusual arrangement of stones that seemed too deliberate to be random when my phone chimed. Surprised to have service this deep in the woods, I checked the notification. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Come home, Daniel." I frowned. Probably a wrong number, though the timing was unsettling. I put my phone away and continued photographing the ruins. When I reviewed the images later, I noticed something I hadn't seen in person. A faint figure standing among the trees at the edge of the clearing, little more than a smudge against the darkness of the forest. I zoomed in but couldn't make out any details. Just a vaguely human shape, watching. I told myself it was a trick of light and shadow, perhaps a deer caught at an odd angle. I ignored the prickling sensation along my spine and continued deeper into the forest. By mid-afternoon, I reached a small creek that wasn't marked on my map. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over moss-covered rocks before disappearing around a bend. I followed it downstream, reasoning that it might lead to the river eventually. The terrain grew more difficult, steep embankments, fallen trees, patches of boot-sucking mud. But it was the silence that truly began to unnerve me. No insects buzzing, no birds calling, not even the sound of wind rustling through leaves. A silence so complete it felt manufactured. I checked my phone's GPS, but the signal had vanished. The map app showed my location as a pulsing blue dot in the middle of a green void with no trails or landmarks visible. I tried not to panic. I could always backtrack along the creek to the logging road, then follow that to my campsite. I still had several hours of daylight left. That's when I saw the second homestead. Unlike the first, this one was largely intact. A small cabin constructed of dark timber, its windows empty sockets staring out at the forest like hollow eyes. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, but the structure still stood, a testament to the craftsmanship of whoever had built it. A small clearing surrounded it, tall grass waving gently despite there being no breeze I could feel. My photographer's instinct took over. This was exactly the kind of atmospheric setting I'd been hoping to find, a forgotten piece of pioneer history being slowly reclaimed by nature. I approached carefully, testing each step before putting my full weight down, wary of rotten floorboards or hidden cellars. The door hung askew on a single rusted hinge. I pushed it open with the tip of my hiking boot and waited, listening for any sound of animal inhabitants, raccoons, possums, or less friendly wildlife. When nothing stirred, I stepped inside, immediately assaulted by the musty smell of decay and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. The cabin's interior was a single room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Broken furniture lay scattered about, the remnants of a simple table, a three-legged chair, the frame of what might have been a bed in one corner. Dusty shelves lined the walls, empty save for a few cracked mason jars and what appeared to be animal bones. But it was the floor that arrested my attention. In the center of the room, the wooden planks had been pried up, revealing dark soil beneath, and scraped into that soil was a crude symbol. A circle intersected by a series of lines that formed what looked like a distorted face, its mouth stretched in an impossible grin. I should have left immediately. Every survival instinct honed from years in the wilderness screamed at me to get out, to return to civilization, to the safety of numbers and electric lights. Instead, I raised my camera and took a photograph. The flash illuminated the cabin's dark corners, and that's when I saw the writing on the walls. Spidery letters carved directly into the wood, names and dates arranged in columns. The most recent date was just 2 weeks earlier. My phone chimed again. Another text from the unknown number. "I've been waiting for you, Daniel." A cold sweat broke out across my skin. This time, I listened to my instincts. I backed out of the cabin, nearly tripping over the threshold in my haste. Outside, the quality of light had changed. Though my watch said it was only 3:30 p.m., the forest had darkened as if the sun were setting. The temperature had dropped noticeably, my breath now fogging in front of my face. I oriented myself and began walking quickly back the way I'd come, following the creek upstream. But after 15 minutes of hiking, I realized the water was now flowing in the wrong direction. Somehow, impossibly, I was still heading downstream, deeper into the forest. I stopped, trying to control my mounting panic. I was an experienced outdoorsman. I had supplies, a compass, a map. I could figure this out. I took out my compass and watched in disbelief as the needle spun lazily, never settling on north. My map, when I unfolded it, showed blank spaces where I knew there should be trails and landmarks. "You're lost," said a voice behind me. I whirled around, nearly losing my footing on the slippery creek bank. Standing not 10 feet away was a man, or what first appeared to be a man. Tall and gaunt, dressed in what looked like handmade clothing from another century. A rough linen shirt, dark trousers held up by suspenders, muddy boots. His face was half hidden by a wild gray beard, but his eyes caught and held my attention. Pale blue, almost colorless and utterly devoid of emotion. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. The man, Elijah Caldwell I would later learn, smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. His teeth were stained dark and several were missing. "I'm the caretaker," he said in a voice like gravel. "Been watching you since you crossed the boundary." "Boundary?" I repeated, taking an involuntary step backward. between your world and mine." He gestured vaguely around us. "Shimek doesn't belong to your time anymore. Hasn't for near 200 years. I told myself I was hallucinating. Stress, dehydration, maybe I'd eaten something toxic. A mushroom brushed against during my hike. Particles inhaled without realizing. "I need to get back to my campsite," I said firmly, deciding to play along until I could escape this clearly disturbed individual. "Near Croton. Can you point me in the right direction?" Elijah's smile widened. "I can do better than that. I can take you there myself." He extended a hand. "For a price." I ignored his outstretched hand. "What price?" "Just a small token. Something personal. A memory, perhaps. One you won't miss." I backed away further. "No thanks. I'll find my own way." I turned and began walking rapidly upstream, or what I hoped was upstream. Behind me, I heard Elijah laughing, the sound echoing unnaturally through the trees. "You'll be back, Daniel Reeves," he called after me. "They always come back when night falls." I walked faster, soon breaking into a jog. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like grasping fingers, roots rising from the earth to trip my feet. The light continued to fade, though according to my watch, sunset was still hours away. After what felt like hours of increasingly panicked hiking, I emerged into a small clearing and stopped short. In the center stood the cabin I'd fled earlier. Somehow, I'd walked in a circle, despite maintaining what I believed was a straight course. "Not possible," I muttered, turning to retreat the way I'd come. But the path had vanished, replaced by dense undergrowth that hadn't been there moments before. I was trapped in the clearing with the cabin, and the sun was now visibly sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of crimson and purple. With no other option, I decided to climb a tree, hoping to spot some landmark that might orient me. I chose a sturdy oak at the edge of the clearing and began to ascend, grateful for the climbing experience that made the task relatively simple. 20 feet up, I paused and looked out over the forest canopy. What I saw made no sense. In every direction, as far as I could see, stretched Shimek Forest. No roads, no clearings, no sign of civilization. The Des Moines River, which should have been visible to the west, was nowhere to be seen. And, most disturbingly, the sun was setting in the north. A rush of vertigo hit me so hard I nearly lost my grip. The world tilted and spun, my senses struggling to reconcile what my eyes were reporting with what I knew to be impossible. I clung to the trunk, pressing my forehead against the rough bark until the sensation passed. When I looked up again, the clearing below had changed. Dozens of figures now surrounded the cabin, standing motionless in a perfect circle. In the fading light, I couldn't make out their features, just silhouettes, unnaturally still, all facing the cabin's entrance. As I watched, frozen with fear, the cabin door swung open. Light spilled out, not the warm yellow glow of lanterns or firelight, but a sickly greenish illumination that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The figures began to move forward in unison, approaching the cabin with the jerky, uncoordinated movements of marionettes. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I needed to see their faces, to confirm that this was real and not some stress-induced hallucination. As if hearing my thoughts, one of the figures paused and turned, looking up directly at my perch in the tree. It had no face, just smooth blank skin stretched over a skull-like shape. A scream built in my throat but emerged as only a whimper. My body seemed to unlock, self-preservation finally overriding curiosity and disbelief. I scrambled down the tree so quickly that I shredded my palms on the bark and wrenched my ankle landing awkwardly on the forest floor. I ran. I ran without direction or purpose, driven by blind animal panic. Branches whipped my face, thorns tore at my clothing. Unseen obstacles sent me sprawling more than once. But each time I got up and continued running, spurred on by the certainty that something was pursuing me. Something that had once been human, but no longer remembered what that meant. Night fell completely, plunging the forest into impenetrable darkness. I stumbled to a halt, gasping for breath, my lungs burning and legs trembling with exhaustion. I fumbled for my headlamp, nearly sobbing with relief when it flickered to life. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small circle of forest floor and little else. I tried my phone again, still no signal, and now the battery was dangerously low. I switched it to airplane mode to conserve what power remained and used the compass app, which seemed to be functioning normally again. According to it, I was heading northeast. If I continued in this direction, I should eventually reach the main road that ran along the northern boundary of the forest. With no better option, I pressed on, moving more carefully now. The forest at night was a different world, threatening, alive with sounds I couldn't identify. Strange rustlings followed my progress, always just outside the range of my headlamp. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of reflective eyes watching from between trees, blinking out when I tried to focus on them. The temperature continued to drop until my breath clouded before me and my fingers grew numb despite my gloves. October in Iowa could be chilly, no, but this was an unnatural cold that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, rising up through my boots to settle in my bones. After an hour of slow progress, I came upon a small stream. Not the creek I'd followed earlier, but a narrow rivulet of black water that carved a winding path through the undergrowth. Relieved to have found a feature that might be marked on my map, I knelt to check my location. The water reflected my headlamp's beam back at me, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I saw that the water was not alone in its reflection. Behind my own face, clearly visible despite the darkness, stood one of the faceless figures from the clearing. I lurched to my feet and spun around. Nothing was there, just empty forest stretching away into darkness. When I looked back at the stream, the reflection was gone as well. I was alone. Or so I thought. "They don't like trespassers," came a voice from the darkness, a different voice than Elijah's, higher pitched and wavering with age. My headlamp beam found her sitting on a fallen log not 10 feet away, an elderly woman in a faded floral dress that might have been fashionable in the 1940s. Her white hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her hands were folded primly in her lap. Despite the freezing temperature, she showed no signs of discomfort. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice cracking. "And who are they?" "Margaret Holloway," she replied, ignoring my second question. "I lived in these woods for 63 years before they took me. Now I live here forever." She gestured around vaguely. "You shouldn't have come to the old Thatcher cabin. It's a doorway, you see. Once you cross the threshold, you're marked." "Marked for what?" I couldn't keep the tremor from my voice. Margaret smiled sadly. "For the collector. It's why Elijah tried to bargain with you. He's trying to fill his quota so he can rest. We all are." "I don't understand," I said, fighting the urge to run again. Some instinct told me that showing fear to this woman would be dangerous. "No, you wouldn't," Margaret sighed. "No one does until it's too late, but you will." She cocked her head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "They're coming. If I were you, I'd head for the river. Cross running water, and you might escape before midnight." "Which way to the river?" I asked urgently. Margaret pointed to her left. "West, always west. But be careful. The forest will try to turn you around. It always does." Before I could ask anything else, she was gone. Not running or walking away, but simply there one moment and gone the next, leaving the fallen log empty. I turned west as she'd instructed and began walking as quickly as I dared in the darkness. True to Margaret's warning, I soon found myself veering off course, drawn inexorably north despite my best efforts to maintain a westward heading. I had to check my compass every few minutes, correcting my course each time. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, snapping twigs, rustling undergrowth, and occasionally a low, moaning sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. I increased my pace, no longer caring about noise or obstacles, focused only on reaching the river before whatever was behind me closed the distance. When my headlamp finally illuminated a wide expanse of dark water, I nearly wept with relief. The Des Moines River stretched before me, perhaps 50 yards across at this point. The opposite shore was a vague smudge of deeper darkness against the night sky. I scrambled down the embankment, loose soil and small rocks giving way beneath my boots. At the river's edge, I hesitated. The water looked frigid, and the current was strong. Swimming across would be dangerous under the best circumstances, potentially deadly in the dark. Behind me, the forest erupted with activity. My headlamp beam caught flashes of movement between the trees, pale figures moving with inhuman speed, converging on my position. I had no choice. I waded into the river, gasping as the icy water soaked through my boots and pants. By the time I was knee-deep, my legs had gone numb. By waist-deep, I could no longer feel anything below my torso. Still, I pressed on, fighting the current that threatened to sweep me downstream. When the water reached my chest, I lost my footing on the slippery riverbed. The current caught me, spinning me around as I struggled to keep my head above water. My backpack became a dead weight, dragging me under. I managed to unbuckle it, watching it disappear into the black water as I fought my way back to the surface. The cold was paralyzing, my limbs responding sluggishly to commands. But fear was a powerful motivator. I began swimming clumsily, using every technique I could remember from long-ago lessons. The far shore seemed impossibly distant, but I forced myself to focus only on the next stroke, the next breath. Behind me, I heard splashing, something entering the water in pursuit. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to waste the energy. My strength was failing rapidly, the cold sapping my reserves more efficiently than any physical exertion could have. Just as I was certain I would sink beneath the surface for the last time, my foot scraped against something solid. The riverbed. I was nearing the opposite shore. With renewed determination, I pushed forward until I could stand, then waded through the shallows and collapsed on the muddy bank. For several minutes, I could only lie there, coughing up river water and shivering uncontrollably. When I finally raised my head, I saw them lined up on the far shore. Dozens of figures standing at the water's edge, their blank faces catching the moonlight. Among them, I recognized Elijah and Margaret, standing slightly apart from the others. Even from this distance, I could feel their hunger, their need. As I watched, another figure stepped forward from the tree line. Taller than the others, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. The collector, I presumed. It raised one elongated arm and pointed directly at me across the water. A voice that wasn't a voice filled my head. "This isn't over, Daniel Reeves. Water holds no boundary forever. I've marked you now. Wherever you go, I will find you. Whatever you do, I will know. And when you sleep, I will be waiting." I scrambled backward up the bank, not taking my eyes off the opposite shore until I reached the tree line. Only then did I turn and continue my desperate flight, praying that I was now in a normal part of the forest, that the road, or a farmhouse, or any sign of civilization would appear. Dawn found me stumbling along County Road J40, hypothermic and delirious. A farmer named Williams discovered me when he stopped his truck to investigate what he first thought was a wounded animal on the roadside. He later told me I'd been mumbling about collectors and quotas, about faceless people and cabins that shouldn't exist. The local hospital treated me for hypothermia, exposure, and numerous cuts and abrasions. The doctors suggested my confused state was the result of my physical condition combined with the stress of being lost in the woods overnight, a common enough occurrence with hikers who overestimated their abilities or underestimated the terrain. I didn't argue with their assessment. What would be the point? I left Iowa as soon as I was discharged, driving nonstop back to Colorado, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Chemek Forest. I told myself it was over, that I'd experienced some kind of stress-induced breakdown, that none of it had been real. Then my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. When I checked it at a gas station outside Omaha, there was a photo of my backpack, the one I'd released into the river, sitting on the porch of a familiar cabin. Beneath it was a simple message. "You forgot something, Daniel. Don't worry, I'm keeping it safe until you return." I changed my phone number the next day. I moved apartments the week after that. I've done everything possible to forget what happened in that forest. But sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear Elijah's gravelly voice. They always come back when night falls. And sometimes, in my dreams, I find myself standing before that cabin again, my hand reaching for the crooked door as faceless figures watch from the trees, waiting to welcome me home. Last night I found mud from the Des Moines River on my bedroom floor, and I know now that Margaret was wrong. Crossing running water isn't enough. Nothing is enough when the collector wants you for his own. My name is Eliza Harmon, and I am 32 years old. This happened in October 2023. The crackling of dry leaves beneath my hiking boots had once been a comforting sound. Now, each step sent jolts of paranoia up my spine as I trudged deeper into Chemek State Forest. The late afternoon sun barely penetrated the dense canopy overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the forest floor. I'd come to southeast Iowa to escape. From my thoughts, from my grief, from the pitying glances of friends and family after Michael's accident. "It'll be good for you to get away," my sister had insisted. "Clear your head." So here I was, 3 days into a week-long solo camping trip, desperately trying to outrun memories that clung to me like the damp October air. I adjusted my backpack straps, wincing at the raw spots forming on my shoulders. I wasn't an experienced hiker by any means, but after spending most of my adult life behind a computer screen as a graphic designer in Chicago, the physical exertion felt like penance. My original plan had been to follow the established trails around Donaldson, but yesterday I'd spotted a deer path veering west toward what my map indicated was Lick Creek. Something about the untouched wilderness called to me. A chance to truly disconnect. The ranger at the visitor center had mentioned that the area was seldom traveled this time of year, perfect for solitude seekers. "Just don't go wandering off trail too far," he'd warned with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "These woods get confusing, even for locals." I should have listened. As twilight approached, I began searching for a suitable campsite. My muscles ached pleasantly from the day's hike, and my mind felt clearer than it had in months. I found a small clearing not far from the creek. Flat ground, sheltered by a cluster of oak trees, with enough space for my one-person tent and a small campfire. Perfect. I went through the motions methodically, setting up camp with growing efficiency after my previous nights in the forest. Tent pitched, sleeping bag unrolled, kindling gathered. The simple tasks kept my hands busy and my mind quiet. Night fell quickly in the forest. One moment I was securing my bear bag in a nearby tree. Though black bears were rare in Iowa, it was still good practice. And the next, darkness had swallowed everything beyond the reach of my headlamp. I built a modest fire and heated a pouch of dehydrated beef stew, watching steam rise into the cold air as I ate. The isolation that had felt so therapeutic during daylight began to take on a different quality as night deepened. Chemek Forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through branches, the occasional distant hoot of an owl. Usually, these wilderness symphonies lulled me to sleep, but tonight they seemed watchful. I pulled my journal from my pack, flipping through pages of scattered thoughts and rough sketches from the previous days. Writing had become my therapy since Michael's death. The words flowed easier out here, raw and honest in a way they couldn't be back home. "I felt you today, Michael. Not the crushing weight of your absence, but something lighter. A memory of joy rather than loss. Is that progress? Is that what moving on feels like?" The crack of a branch snapping jerked my attention upward. I froze, pen hovering over paper. It was probably just a deer. The forest was full of them, I'd spotted several throughout my hike. I scanned the darkness beyond my fire's glow, seeing nothing but blackness between tree trunks. "Hello?" I called, immediately feeling foolish. Of course there was no one out here, but the forest had gone unnaturally silent. The background noises I'd been half tuning out, insects, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, had ceased entirely. The silence pressed against my ears like cotton wool, broken only by the soft popping of the fire. That's when I heard it, a whisper so faint I might have imagined it. "Eliza!" I jerked to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs. "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin and frightened. Nothing answered but the crackling flames. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every sound, real or imagined, jolted me awake. I blamed it on nerves, on being alone in an unfamiliar place, on the ghost stories the ranger had mentioned in passing about lost hikers in these woods. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones alongside a dull headache. I considered breaking camp and heading back to the main trail. 3 days of solitude had been therapeutic, but the thought of another night alone suddenly seemed less appealing. Still, checking my map, I realized I was closer to completing my planned loop than backtracking. Just one more night in the wilderness, then back to civilization. I packed efficiently, leaving no trace of my overnight stay, and continued west along Lick Creek. The October sun struggled to warm the day, but the exertion of hiking soon had me shedding layers. The beauty of Shemek Forest in autumn was undeniable, a mosaic of amber, crimson, and gold that almost made me forget the unease of the previous night. Around midday, I stopped at a boulder overlooking a small waterfall where the creek tumbled over a rocky ledge, the perfect lunch spot. I shed my pack with relief and pulled out a protein bar and dried apple slices. That's when I noticed the carving. It was crude but unmistakable. A stick figure with elongated limbs and no discernible face, its arms outstretched. Beside it, fresh enough that traces of wood pulp still clung to the grooves, were the letters E.H., my initials. I scanned the surrounding area, suddenly feeling exposed. This had to be a coincidence. Maybe the carving had been there for years, made by someone with the same initials, but something about the freshness of the cuts made my skin crawl. I abandoned my lunch break, shoving the remaining food into my pack and setting off at a faster pace. The serene quality of my hike had vanished, replaced by a prickling awareness of every sound around me. Twice I stopped, certain I heard footsteps matching mine, only to be met with ordinary forest sounds. By late afternoon, I'd pushed myself harder than planned, eager to put distance between myself and whatever had unsettled me. According to my map, I was nearing the western edge of the forest, where the trees would thin and eventually give way to farmland. Beyond that, a small access road should lead back to the main highway. But as the day waned, the trees showed no sign of thinning. In fact, they seemed to grow denser, their trunks clustered more tightly together. I checked my compass again. I was heading west, just as intended. Yet something wasn't right. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a GPS signal despite knowing reception was spotty at best in these woods. No signal, as expected. The screen reflected my worried face back at me, dark circles already forming under my eyes from the restless night before. That's when I saw it. A figure standing between distant trees, partially obscured by foliage. Just a person-shaped darkness, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. "Is someone there?" The forest absorbed my words without echo. Adjusting my pack, I made a decision. I needed to find a campsite now, while there was still light. Tomorrow, I'd head due north until I hit one of the marked trails. The loop could wait for another trip, or never. Right now, I just wanted out. I found a suitable clearing as dusk approached and went through my camp setup routine with mechanical efficiency. Each task completed was a small victory against the growing darkness. The familiar actions, driving stakes, collecting kindling, Filtering water from my canteen helped settle my nerves. Then I realized my headlamp was missing. I distinctly remembered packing it that morning, tucking it into the top pocket of my backpack where I always kept it. I emptied the entire pack, spreading my belongings across my sleeping bag. No headlamp. Without it, the night would be nearly impossible to navigate. As darkness fell, I built my fire larger than usual, feeding it with extra wood to create a protective circle of light. I told myself I was being irrational. Headlamps get misplaced. Woods play tricks on your mind when you're alone. Carvings are coincidences. I heated my dinner, the last of my freeze-dried meals, and ate without tasting it, eyes constantly scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. The first stars appeared overhead in patches between the branches, a reminder of how small I was in this vast wilderness. Sleep seemed impossible, but I crawled into my tent anyway, zipping it closed as if the thin nylon could protect me from whatever my imagination had conjured. I placed my hunting knife, more of a precaution than a tool I'd expected to use, beside my sleeping bag, within easy reach. Despite my anxiety, exhaustion eventually pulled me under. I jerked awake to total darkness. The fire had died, not even embers glowing in the pit. How long had I been asleep? My watch read 3:17 a.m., the witching hour, Michael would have joked. He'd always loved horror movies, the cheesier the better. That's when I heard it again. My name, whispered from somewhere in the darkness outside my tent. Eliza. I clutched my knife, blood rushing in my ears. Who's there? My voice cracked with fear. Silence. Then a sound I couldn't immediately identify. A wet, dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across damp leaves. It was moving around the perimeter of my campsite. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to see by. The battery was at 12%. I'd been conserving it for emergencies. If this didn't qualify, what did? A shadow fell across my tent. Something large, blocking what little ambient light came from the stars above. I held my breath as it moved past, continuing its circuit. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Then it stopped, right outside my tent flap. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. I could hear myself breathing, too loudly, too quickly. The knife trembled in my hand. Michael sent me. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was raspy and deep, coming from just inches away, separated from me only by the thin fabric of my tent. A sob caught in my throat. Michael's dead, I managed to say. Is he? Something pressed against the side of the tent. An outstretched hand, fingers splayed. The nylon dimpled inward from the pressure. The hand was too large, the fingers too long and jointed in all the wrong places. He's waiting for you, Eliza, in the old Keller homestead. 1/2 a mile west. He's been waiting so long. The hand withdrew, leaving a smudge of something dark on the tent fabric. No. I shook my head violently, though no one could see. You're not real. This isn't happening. A low chuckle answered me, the sound like rocks grinding together. The debt must be paid, child. A life for a life. Your grief called me, and now the bargain must be honored. What bargain? I never made any bargain. Didn't you? All those nights crying into your pillow? I'd give anything to see him again. Words have power in Shemek Forest. They reach interested parties. I remembered those desperate nights after the funeral. The bargaining stage of grief, they called it. I'd have given anything then. Anything. Don't make me come fetch you, Eliza Harmon. The terms are kinder if you come willingly. With that, the presence withdrew. I heard its uneven footsteps receding into the forest, that wet, dragging sound growing fainter until silence returned. I sat frozen in my tent, knife clutched against my chest for what felt like hours. Eventually, a faint gray light began filtering through the trees, dawn approaching, though the sun itself was still well below the horizon. In the growing light, I examined the smudge on my tent wall. It looked like mud, but smelled metallic. Blood. I broke camp with shaking hands, struggling to focus on simple tasks. My mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Had grief finally broken my sanity? Was I being stalked by some backwoods predator? Or was something truly supernatural happening in Shemek Forest? The rational part of me said to head east, back toward the visitor center in safety. But another part, the part that still woke up reaching for Michael on the empty side of our bed, whispered that I should go west, to the Keller homestead. Just to see, just to be sure. I compromised with myself. I would head north as planned, toward the marked trails. If I happened to spot any signs of an old homestead, I'd investigate from a safe distance. But my priority was getting back to civilization. The morning was eerily calm as I hiked, no breeze stirring the autumn leaves. I had the unsettling feeling of being watched, but each time I spun around, I saw nothing but trees and undergrowth. My pace quickened with each passing hour, less hiking and more fleeing. Around mid-morning, I spotted a break in the trees ahead, a small clearing that didn't look natural. As I approached, I saw the remnants of a stone foundation, half reclaimed by the forest. Chimney stones stood in a crumbling column at one end, while rotting timber beams crisscrossed the ground like fallen matchsticks. The Keller homestead. I hadn't headed north after all. My compass confirmed what I already suspected. I'd been walking west all morning, despite my intentions. The needle spun lazily when I held it level, never settling on a direction. Either the compass was broken, or something in these woods was affecting it. I stood at the edge of the clearing, debating whether to approach the ruins. There was no sign of life. No Michael. No mysterious figure from the night before. Just the skeletal remains of a pioneer home long abandoned. "I'm here," I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. No response came except a crow's harsh caw from a nearby branch. It watched me with beady eyes before taking flight, disappearing into the canopy. Common sense told me to leave, to run as fast as my legs would carry me. But I had come this far, and if there was even the slightest chance... I stepped into the clearing. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as I approached the foundation. The sun, now high overhead, couldn't seem to penetrate this space. The light here was gray and diffuse, as if passing through a dirty window. I picked my way carefully across the ruins, searching for... what? A sign? Michael himself? My stomach twisted with equal parts hope and dread. In the center of what must have once been the main room, a trap door lay half open in the ground. A root cellar, probably. Dark steps descended into blackness. "Michael?" I called down hesitantly, my voice small in the vast silence. Something moved in the darkness below. A shuffling step, then another. My breath caught. "Michael, is that you?" "Eliza." The voice that floated up from the darkness was achingly familiar, yet wrong somehow, like hearing Michael through a bad phone connection. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight despite the dwindling battery. The beam illuminated a set of crude wooden steps leading down into an earthen cellar. And there, at the bottom, a figure stood with its back to me. It wore Michael's favorite flannel shirt, the red and black one I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. His dark hair curled at the nape of his neck, just like I remembered. "Michael," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "How is this possible?" "Come down, Eliza." He didn't turn. "I've missed you so much." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I found myself taking the first step down, then the second. The wood creaked beneath my weight. My phone's light flickered, battery nearly spent. "I don't understand," I said, continuing my descent. "The accident. I identified your body. Did you?" Still he didn't turn. "Look closer, love." I was nearly at the bottom now, close enough to touch him. The cellar smelled of damp earth and something else, something cloying and putrid. "Michael, please look at me." Slowly, he began to turn. My phone died, plunging us into darkness. I heard him moving closer, felt cold breath on my face. "Now we can be together," he whispered, his voice changing mid-sentence, dropping into that grinding, inhuman register I'd heard outside my tent. A life for a life. Hands gripped my shoulders, hands too large with too many joints in the fingers. I screamed, twisting free and scrambling back up the stairs. Something caught my ankle. Not a hand, but something ropey and slick. I kicked wildly, connecting with something solid. A howl of rage erupted from the darkness below, the sound more animal than human. Adrenaline propelled me up and out of the cellar. I slammed the trapdoor shut and dragged a fallen beam across it, though I knew it wouldn't hold for long. Already I could hear scratching from beneath, wood splintering as something broke through. I ran blindly across the clearing toward the tree line, my only thought to put distance between myself and the homestead. Branches whipped my face as I plunged into the forest, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I heard the crash of the trapdoor being thrown open, followed by that terrible wet dragging sound. Faster now, in pursuit. I ran until my lungs burned, until spots danced before my eyes. The logical part of my brain tried to formulate a plan. Find water, follow it downstream. Water always leads to civilization, but panic had taken over. When I finally collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping for breath, I realized I'd lost my backpack somewhere in my mad flight. No water, no food, no emergency supplies, just the clothes on my back and the knife still miraculously clipped to my belt. The forest had gone silent again. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves, just my own ragged breathing. I strained to hear any sign of pursuit, but detected nothing. Had I lost it? Was I even heading in the right direction anymore? I looked up at the sky, trying to locate the sun to orient myself, but the canopy was too dense here. There was nothing to do but keep moving and hope I found a trail, a road, anything. As I pushed away from the tree, planning my next move, my hand came away sticky. I glanced at the trunk and recoiled. A crude symbol had been carved into the bark, still oozing sap, a circle with a diagonal line through it. Around its perimeter, more of those elongated stick figures, their arms connecting in a grotesque chain. I turned slowly, scanning the surrounding trees. Each one bore the same marking, the carvings fresh and dripping. I was standing in the center of a deliberate pattern. "The debt must be paid, Eliza Harmon." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I spun wildly, knife out before me, seeing nothing but marked trees stretching in every direction. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I already told you. A life for a life." A figure stepped from behind a distant tree, a silhouette darker than the forest shadows. It moved with that same uneven gait, shoulders too broad, arms hanging too low. "You're not Michael," I said, backing away. It cocked its head at an impossible angle. "I can be. I can wear his face, speak with his voice. Isn't that what you wanted? What you begged for in your grief?" "No, not like this. The locals call me Old Man Keller," it continued, taking another step forward, "though I wore many faces before that one, and will wear many after. The desperate come to me, willingly or not. The grieving call me with their tears and bargains." I continued backing away, trying to keep distance between us. "I never called you. I never asked for this. Didn't you? All those nights crying out that you'd give anything to have him back?" It was close enough now that I could make out features or lack thereof. Its face was a blank oval of stretched skin, featureless except for a line where a mouth should be. As I watched in horror, the surface rippled, features pushing outward from within like someone pressing against a latex mask. Eyes formed, then a nose, then lips. Michael's face emerging from the blankness. But wrong. The proportions slightly off, the expressions mechanical. "See?" it said with Michael's voice, "just as you remember him." I shook my head violently. "You're not him. Michael is dead." "Death is negotiable in Shemek Forest," it said, stretching Michael's face into an unnatural smile. "For the right price." "What price?" I asked, though I already knew. "You, Eliza. Your life in exchange for his return. A fair trade, wouldn't you say? The grief-stricken lover sacrificing herself to restore her beloved." It spread its two long arms. "Very romantic. They'll tell stories about you." "And if I refuse?" Its smile widened until it split the edges of Michael's face. "Then I take you anyway, but he stays dead. Your choice merely determines what happens after I feed." My back hit a tree. I'd run out of room to retreat. The knife trembled in my hand, a pitiful defense against whatever this creature was. It reached for me with those wrong hands, the fingers elongating as they stretched toward my face. "Time to choose, Eliza." In that moment, clarity cut through my fear. Michael was gone. Whatever stood before me was a perversion of everything he'd been, and he would have wanted me to live. I lunged forward, driving my knife deep into its chest. The thing wearing Michael's face looked down at the blade embedded in its sternum with mild surprise. Then it laughed, a horrible sound that started as Michael's warm chuckle but degraded into that grinding, inhuman noise. "Brave," it said, gripping my wrist before I could withdraw the knife. But ineffective. Its other hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my throat. The pressure was immediate and crushing. I clawed at its arm with my free hand, but it was like trying to bend steel. Dark spots appeared at the edges of my vision as it lifted me off my feet, my toes scraping desperately for purchase on the ground. "Your grief was particularly delicious," it whispered, Michael's face beginning to slip, features running like melted wax. "So raw, so pure, I couldn't resist answering your call." As consciousness began to fade, something changed. A shout in the distance, the beam of a powerful flashlight cutting through the trees. "Hello? Is someone there?" The creature's head snapped toward the sound, its grip on my throat loosening just enough to allow a desperate gasp of air. "Forest Service, we're conducting a sweep of the area." Multiple voices now, and the distant bark of a search dog. The thing hissed, its face now completely formless again. "This isn't over," it growled, releasing me. I collapsed at the base of the tree, gulping air into my starved lungs. "The debt remains. I'll find you again, when you're alone." It backed away, melting into the shadows between trees. Within seconds, it was gone. I don't remember much of what followed. The search party, dispatched when I failed to check in at the ranger station as scheduled, found me semi-conscious and babbling about Michael and Old Man Keller. They attributed my state to dehydration and exposure, a plausible explanation I didn't bother to correct. My knife was never found. Neither was my backpack. The rangers had no record of any Keller homestead in that section of Shemek Forest, though one older officer mentioned local legends about early settlers who disappeared in the area, leaving behind only empty cabins. I spent 2 days in the county hospital before being released with instructions to rest and follow up with my doctor at home. My sister drove down from Chicago to get me, her face tight with worry as she helped me into her car. "What happened out there, Eliza?" she asked as we crossed the Iowa state line. I considered telling her everything, about the whispers, the carvings, the thing that wore Michael's face, but who would believe such a story? Better to let it fade into a traumatic memory, a grief-induced hallucination. "I got lost," I said finally. "Spent a couple of rough nights in the woods." She squeezed my hand. "Well, you're safe now." Am I, though? It's been 6 months since Shemek Forest. I'm back at work, back in therapy, back to some semblance of normal life, but sometimes, in the darkest hours of night, I hear scratching at my bedroom window. When I check the bathroom mirror in the morning, there are faint bruises on my throat in the shape of elongated fingers. And twice now, I've found carvings on trees in the small park across from my apartment. Crude stick figures with outstretched arms and a simple message carved below. A life for a life. The debt remains. Old Man Keller is patient. He can wait. And deep down, in moments of weakness when grief overwhelms me again, I wonder if I'll eventually choose to pay that debt. After all, wouldn't you give anything to see your loved one again? My name is Marcus Whelan, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023. The Yellow River State Forest had always called to me in a way I couldn't explain. Growing up in eastern Iowa, I'd heard the stories about Volga Hollow, how the mist never quite lifted from the forest floor, how hikers would hear their names whispered when no one was around, how watches would run backward in certain clearings. I dismissed them as local folklore designed to keep city tourists from overcrowding the trails. After Emily left, taking half our life together and all of my confidence with her, I needed something, anything, to prove I could still stand on my own. So I packed my gear, loaded up my German Shepherd, Rusty, and headed for the most remote campsites in Yellow River. "Just you and me, boy," I scratched behind Rusty's ears as we pulled into the nearly empty ranger station parking lot. The mid-October air had a bite that promised the first frost wasn't far off. Perfect camping weather, cold enough to keep the casual hikers away but not so frigid that survival became the primary concern. The ranger, a weathered man named Gus with skin like tanned leather, eyed my gear with what I read as skepticism. "North Ridge Trail's closed," he said, checking my permit. "Rock slide last week. You'll want to take the Hollow Trail if you're heading to Site 14. "That's through Volga Hollow, right?" I asked, trying to sound knowledgeable. Gus's eyes flicked up to mine. "That's right. Beautiful this time of year. Just stay on the marked path." He handed back my permit. "And watch your dog. We've had reports of coyotes getting bold lately." I nodded, but something in his tone made the hair on my arms rise beneath my flannel, as if he wasn't talking about coyotes at all. The trail started innocently enough. Rusty bounded ahead, his copper coat flashing between the trees like autumn fire. The woods were a tapestry of gold and crimson, leaves crunching satisfyingly beneath my boots. For the first time since the divorce papers arrived, I felt something close to peace. That feeling lasted precisely 3 hours. The first sign something was wrong came when the birdsong stopped. 1 minute the forest was alive with chickadees and nuthatches. The next, silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Rusty noticed too, his ears pricking forward, his usually swishing tail held rigid. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, hand automatically reaching for the hunting knife at my belt. Rusty whined low in his throat but didn't move. A branch snapped somewhere to our left, deep in a thicket of pine. I turned slowly, scanning the underbrush. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. "Hello," I called, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded absurdly loud in the unnatural quiet. No response came, but as we continued walking, Rusty stayed unnervingly close to my leg. We reached campsite 14 as dusk was settling. It was a small clearing set back from the trail, bordered on one side by a steep limestone bluff and on the other by a sluggish creek that eventually fed into the Yellow River. Perfect defensive position, I thought, then wondered why that consideration had suddenly become important. Setting up camp was routine enough to be comforting. I pitched my tent, arranged my cooking gear, and gathered wood for a fire. Rusty patrolled the perimeter of our site, occasionally freezing to stare into the darkening forest before resuming his circuit. Night fell quickly, as it does in October. The fire cast our shadows long against the limestone cliff face, and stars emerged in patches between the canopy of nearly bare branches. I fed Rusty, heated some chili for myself, and tried to enjoy the simplicity of the moment. "See, we're doing fine on our own," I told him as he licked his bowl clean. His only response was to look past me into the darkness and growl softly. I turned, but saw nothing. Still, I added another log to the fire. Sleep came reluctantly that night. Every time I would start to drift off, some sound would jerk me back to alertness. A rustling too deliberate to be wind, a distant crack that might have been a footstep. Rusty was worse, pacing the confines of the tent, his nails clicking against the ground sheet. "Coyotes," I whispered, remembering the ranger's warning. But coyotes didn't explain the prickling sensation at the base of my skull, like someone was standing just behind me. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I dreamed of Emily, of all people. She was standing in our campsite, wearing the blue dress she'd worn on our first date, but it was torn and muddied at the hem. "You shouldn't have come here, Marcus," she said, her voice oddly flat. "This place remembers what happened." I wanted to ask what she meant, but in the dream, my mouth was full of dirt. I woke, gasping, hands clawing at my face. The tent was oppressively dark, my phone showing 3:17 a.m. Rusty was gone. The zipper on the tent was open. "Rusty!" I called, my voice barely audible. No answering bark came. I fumbled for my headlamp and knife, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped both. Outside, the fire had burned down to embers that cast more shadow than light. The air felt wrong, too dense, too still, carrying a faint smell like wet copper and rotting leaves. "Rusty!" I called louder, sweeping my light across the campsite. No sign of him. Something moved at the edge of my light's beam. I swung around, heart hammering against my ribs. There, just at the tree line, stood a figure. For a disorienting moment, I thought it was Emily, a perfect mirror of my dream. But as my light steadied on it, I realized it was a man. Tall, almost skeletally thin, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned hunting clothes. He stood perfectly still, arms hanging at his sides, face obscured by shadow despite my light shining directly at him. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Have you seen my dog?" The figure didn't respond or move. I took an uncertain step forward, and as I did, he retreated a single step into the trees, maintaining the exact distance between us. "Who are you?" I called, fear giving way to a flicker of anger. "What do you want?" In answer, he lifted one arm and pointed, not at me, but past me, toward the creek. Every instinct screamed not to turn my back on him, but something compelled me to look. The creek, which had been a gentle trickle when we'd made camp, was now swollen and dark, its surface gleaming like obsidian in the starlight. When I turned back to the figure, he was gone. I should have packed up then, should have grabbed what I could carry and hiked back to my car, trail markers be damned. But Rusty was still missing, and I wouldn't, leave without him. "Rusty!" I called again, my voice echoing off the limestone bluff. I thought I heard a faint whine in response coming from the direction of the creek. The water was moving faster than it should have been, given there'd been no rain. Its surface reflected the stars in broken, shifting patterns that seemed to form and reform into shapes almost recognizable. Faces, maybe, or hands reaching upward. I followed the bank, beam of light bouncing with each step until I saw something that stopped me cold. Footprints emerging from the creek bed. But not human prints, and not animal either, at least not any animal I knew. They were roughly the size of my hand, with 3 long toes splayed forward and one back, each ending in what looked like a sharp claw that had gouged the mud. They led from the water up the bank, then disappeared into the underbrush. As I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, a low whine came from the thicket where the prints vanished. "Rusty!" I pushed aside branches, the beam of my headlamp cutting through the darkness. My dog was there, curled into himself, trembling violently. Relief flooded through me as I reached for him, then froze as I saw what he was staring at. Just beyond him, half concealed by fallen leaves, lay a dead fawn. But that wasn't what raised the hair on my neck. The animal had been opened, not torn or bitten, but cut with precision along its belly and chest. Its organs were missing, the cavity empty and clean as if it had been surgically emptied. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, bile rising in my throat. Rusty whimpered again, pressing against my legs. I grabbed his collar and backed away from the grisly scene, suddenly acutely aware of how vulnerable we were. Back at the campsite, I built the fire up as high as it would go, creating a circle of light I desperately hoped would keep at bay whatever had killed that fawn. Rusty wouldn't leave my side, his body still trembling against mine. I checked my phone. 4:30 a.m. and no signal. First light wouldn't come for at least 2 more hours. 2 hours of waiting in the dark, jumping at every sound from the forest around us. To quiet my mind, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. The figure could have been another camper or hunter. The swollen creek could be explained by rainfall upstream. The fawn could have been killed by a predator, a mountain lion perhaps, though they were rare in Iowa. The strange tracks, those were harder to explain away. The fire popped loudly, sending up a shower of sparks. In that brief flare of light, I caught movement across the campsite, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness near the bluff. Rusty saw it too. His growl vibrated through his chest, but he made no move to chase whatever it was. "Who's there?" I called, knife held out in front of me in what I knew was a useless gesture. The shadow moved again, resolving into a crouching figure at the edge of the firelight. Not the tall man I'd seen earlier. This was smaller, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being manipulated by unskilled hands. "I know you're there," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "Show yourself." The figure straightened, stepping fully into the light. It was a woman, or had been once. Her face was gaunt, eyes sunken into dark hollows, skin pulled tight across her cheekbones. She wore what might have once been hiking clothes, now reduced to filthy tatters. Her hair hung in matted ropes around her face, but most disturbing was her expression. Blank, yet somehow hungry, her eyes fixed not on my face but on my chest, as if she could see my heart beating beneath my jacket. "Are you hurt?" I managed to ask. "Do you need help?" She cocked her head at an impossible angle, the movement too fluid, too far for normal human anatomy. When she spoke, her voice was like stones grinding together. "You shouldn't have come to Volga Hollow, Marcus Whelan." My blood turned to ice water. I hadn't told anyone my full name, not even the ranger at the station. "How do you know my name?" I whispered. Her lips stretched in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth too sharp, too numerous. The Hollow knows all who enter. The Hollow remembers. Rusty's growl deepened and I clutched his collar tighter, afraid he might lunge at her. "What do you want?" I asked. Her head tilted again, the other direction this time, her neck bending like a broken branch. "Want?" she repeated as if the concept was foreign. "We want what was promised, what is owed." "I don't owe you anything," I said, fear curdling into anger. "I don't even know you." "Not you," she said, her voice suddenly layered with others as if multiple people were speaking through her. "The one who came before. Volga." The name hit me like a physical blow. I'd assumed Volga Hollow was named for European settlers, maybe a corruption of some German or Scandinavian word. But the way she said it, like a name, a person, sent a chill through me. "Who was Volga?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know. The woman's impossible smile widened. "The one who promised us flesh." She took a step forward. I raised my knife higher. "Stay back," I warned. She stopped, but not because of my threat. Her head snapped toward the forest, movements again too quick, too jerky. I followed her gaze but saw nothing. When I looked back, she was gone. No movement, no sound, just there one moment and gone the next. Rusty whined, pressing closer to me. I didn't sleep again that night. Dawn brought fog so thick I could barely see the trees at the edge of our campsite. It clung to the ground in writhing tendrils, seeming to retreat from the dying embers of my fire, only to curl back the moment the heat faded. In daylight, I tried to convince myself the night's events had been some kind of hallucination. Stress, isolation, and darkness playing tricks on me. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. The figure in the woods was another hiker. The woman was a homeless person or someone suffering a mental health crisis. the strangeness of their behavior exaggerated by my fear, but I couldn't explain how she knew my name, or the precision-cut fawn, or the tracks. I needed to get back to civilization. I began packing up camp, movements mechanical, mind still racing. Rusty stayed unnervingly close, his usual morning enthusiasm absent. As I was collapsing the tent, my hand brushed something slick and cold clinging to the outer shell. I pulled back, finger tracing through a clear, viscous substance unlike any morning dew I'd ever seen. It stretched between my fingers like half-congealed gelatin and smelled faintly of rot. I wiped it on the grass, skin crawling. The sooner we were out of here, the better. The fog was still dense as we set off, the trail barely visible a few feet ahead. Sound behaved strangely, muffled one moment and too clear the next, as if the forest were breathing around us. Every now and then, I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing but swirling mist. We'd been hiking for maybe an hour when Rusty suddenly stopped, hackles rising, a low growl building in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, scanning the fog-shrouded trees. The mist parted slightly, and I saw we'd reached a fork in the trail. One path continued straight, marked with the yellow blazes we'd been following. The other veered off to the right, marked with faded red paint that might once have been blazes but had worn to shapeless smears on the tree trunks. I pulled out my trail map. There shouldn't have been a fork here, just the main trail continuing through to the ranger station. Rusty's growl intensified, his focus locked on the red-blazed path. I squinted through the fog, trying to see what had him so alarmed. That's when I heard it. My name, whispered so softly I might have imagined it. "Marcus." It seemed to come from the red trail, a woman's voice with an odd, lilting quality. "Hello?" I called, hand instinctively tightening on Rusty's collar. "Marcus, help me." The voice was clearer now, and with a jolt that nearly stopped my heart, I recognized it. Emily. "That's not possible," I muttered to myself. Emily was back in Cedar Rapids living in our old house with her new boyfriend. She wasn't here in Yellow River State Forest calling my name from a fog-shrouded trail. "Please. I'm hurt." Her voice broke on the last word, dissolving into what sounded like a sob. Every rational part of me screamed that this was wrong. A trick, a trap. But what if, by some impossible coincidence, it really was Emily? What if she was actually hurt? I took a step toward the red trail. Rusty barked sharply, planting his feet, refusing to follow. "Marcus, please." Another step. The fog seemed to thicken around me, while clearing slightly along the red path as if creating a tunnel toward the voice. Rusty barked again, more urgently. I looked back at him, suddenly uncertain. That's when I noticed something odd. The fog wasn't behaving like fog should. It was moving against the light breeze, flowing toward the red trail rather than with the wind. And there was something in it. Shapes forming and dissolving, almost like faces pressed against a frosted window. There and gone too quickly to be sure. As I watched, one patch of mist solidified into something more substantial. A hand, reaching toward me, fingers elongated and jointed in too many places. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The hand dissolved back into formless vapor. "Marcus, don't leave me." Emily's voice again, but changed now, a hollowness to it, an echo that hadn't been there before. "You're not Emily," I said aloud, backing away. The fog roiled angrily and the voice dropped all pretense of humanity, becoming a guttural, multi-toned hiss. Flesh that was promised. I ran. Yanking Rusty's collar, I sprinted down the yellow-blazed trail, fog clutching at my ankles like grasping fingers. Behind us, something crashed through the underbrush, something large, moving fast. We ran until my lungs burned and Rusty's tongue lolled from his mouth. Only when the fog thinned and the sunlight strengthened did I dare to slow, collapsing against a tree trunk, gasping for breath. "We're okay," I panted to Rusty, who was scanning the trail behind us, ears alert. "We're okay." But we weren't, because when I pulled out my phone to check our location on the trail map, the GPS showed us miles off course, heading deeper into the forest, not toward the ranger station. That was impossible. We'd followed the yellow blazes exactly. I looked up at the nearest tree. The blaze was there, yellow paint bright against the bark. But as I stared, a drop of something dark oozed from the top of the marking, trickling down like sap. I moved closer. It wasn't sap. It was blood, fresh and red, seeping from beneath the paint. I reached out a trembling hand and scraped at the edge of the blaze. The yellow paint came away easily, revealing not tree bark beneath, but something smooth and pallid that yielded slightly under my touch, like skin. I jerked back as if burned. All around us, blood was now oozing from the blazes on every tree, running in rivulets down the trunks to pool at the roots. "The Hollow remembers," whispered a voice from everywhere and nowhere. "The Hollow claims what is owed." We ran again, no longer following any trail, just crashing through undergrowth, desperate to find our way out. The forest seemed to close in, branches reaching like arms, roots rising to trip our feet. The sun, which should have been climbing higher, was instead sinking, shadows lengthening impossibly fast. And all around us, voices whispered, some pleading, some threatening, all speaking my name. We burst into a clearing and I skidded to a stop, nearly falling. Rusty yelped beside me. Before us stood a cabin, weathered gray wood blending with the surrounding trees. It hadn't been on any of the trail maps. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and warm light glowed from windows partially covered by tattered curtains. More disturbingly, the clearing was ringed with objects hanging from the trees. Bundles of sticks and bones wrapped with sinew, animal skulls with symbols carved into them, jars containing murky liquids and shapes I couldn't identify. Every instinct told me to turn around, to take my chances in the forest rather than approach this place. But darkness was falling unnaturally quickly, and we needed shelter. As I hesitated, the cabin door creaked open. A silhouette appeared, a stooped figure leaning on a walking stick. "Well now," called a cracked elderly voice, "don't just stand there catching flies. Come in before they find you." The old woman, for it was a woman, I could see now as my eyes adjusted, gestured impatiently with a gnarled hand. "Who's they?" I called back, not moving. She cackled, the sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "You've met them already, I'd wager. The Hollow folk? Volga's disciples, been more active lately." She squinted at us. "You're bleeding, boy." I looked down. Blood had soaked through my jeans at the knee, though I had no memory of injuring myself. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "We're just trying to get back to the ranger station." "Not tonight you ain't," she said firmly. "Not if you want to keep your insides inside. Now come in. I don't offer twice." Against my better judgment, I approached the cabin, Rusty pressing against my leg, his hackles still raised. As we got closer, I could see the old woman more clearly. Wispy white hair escaping a faded kerchief, face deeply lined like the bark of an ancient oak, eyes surprisingly bright and sharp in her weathered face. "Name's Agnes," she said as we reached the porch. "And I know yours already, Marcus Whelan. The trees told me." Again that jolt of fear at hearing a stranger speak my name. "How?" "Questions inside," she cut me off, holding the door wider. "Threshold's warded, but won't do no good with it standing open." The cabin's interior was a single room, dominated by a stone fireplace where a pot bubbled over low flames. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a sharp, medicinal smell that partially masked a deeper, mustier odor. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with jars, books, and objects I couldn't immediately identify. Agnes gestured to a rough wooden chair. "Sit. Dog can stay if he behaves." I sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. Rusty settled at my feet, still alert. eyes never leaving Agnes as she busied herself at the fireplace. "You've stirred them up proper," she said, stirring whatever was in the pot. "Been quiet for near a decade, then you come stumbling in, and suddenly they're all in a frenzy." "Who are they?" I asked, voice hoarse. "What's happening in these woods?" Agnes turned, fixing me with those unnervingly bright eyes. "You really don't know? Didn't come looking for them a purpose?" I shook my head. She sighed, suddenly looking every one of her considerable years. "Fool boy, coming to Volga Hollow without knowing its history." She ladled something from the pot into a wooden bowl and thrust it at me. "Eat. You'll need your strength." The stew was gamey but not unpleasant. Chunks of what might have been rabbit swimming in a thick broth with wild onions and some herb I couldn't identify. As I ate, Agnes settled into a rocking chair across from me and began to speak. Volga weren't a place originally. Was a man, Dr. Heinrich Volga, came here in 1878, set himself up as a physician for the logging camps, but that weren't his real purpose. She rocked slowly, the chair creaking in rhythm with her words. He was looking for something he'd read about in old books, stories the natives told about spirits in these woods that could grant powers to those who knew how to call them. Spirits hungry for flesh and blood. My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. Like, demons? Agnes shrugged. "Call 'em what you will. Older than any name we know. They've been here since before humans walked these lands." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Volga found 'em, made a pact, promised regular sacrifices in exchange for knowledge and power." "Sacrifices," I repeated, the stew suddenly sitting heavy in my stomach. "Animals?" Agnes's expression darkened. "Started that way. But the Hollow folks' hunger grew. Soon enough, loggers started going missing. Hunters, local folk." She gestured around the cabin. "This was his place, you know. Volga's. Built it special, right at the center of the hollow. When folks finally figured what he was doing, they came for him. Burned him alive, right where you're sitting." I shot to my feet, bowl clattering to the floor. Rusty jumped up beside me, growling. Agnes cackled again. "Too late now, boy. Already eaten his food." Horror crawled up my throat. "What was in that stew?" "Nothing sinister," she said, still chuckling. "Just rabbit and herbs. But having something of this place inside you makes you easier for them to track." "Why would you do that?" I demanded. "Why help them?" Her amusement vanished, replaced by a hard, brittle anger. "I don't help them. I manage them. Keep the balance. One sacrifice a year keeps them satisfied, stops them trying for more." "Sacrifice," I repeated numbly. "You're saying you kill people." She waved a dismissive hand. "I choose carefully. Those who won't be missed, those who've done wrong. Better one death than many." Her eyes bored into mine. "But this year they're restless, hungry for more than I can provide. And now you've come, stirred them up worse." I backed toward the door, pulling Rusty with me. "We're leaving." "Into the dark?" she asked mildly. "That's your choice, of course, but they're gathered out there now. I can feel them." As if to confirm her words, a low moaning sound came from outside. Not wind, but something almost like singing, wordless and atonal. "What do they want from me specifically?" I asked, hand on the door latch but not opening it yet. Agnes tilted her head, considering me. "Maybe nothing specific. Maybe you just wandered into their hunting ground at the wrong time." She paused. "Or maybe you've got something of theirs, something they want back." My mind raced. I hadn't taken anything from the forest except... The realization hit me like a physical blow. My hand went to my jacket pocket, to the smooth stone I'd picked up by the creek yesterday, just a pretty river rock with unusual striations that had caught my eye. I pulled it out. In the firelight, the striations resolved into what looked disturbingly like a face frozen in a silent scream. Agnes inhaled sharply. "Where did you find that?" "By the creek," I said, suddenly wanting to drop the stone but unable to open my fingers. It's just a rock. That ain't no ordinary rock, she said, voice hushed. That's a soul stone, one of Volga's creations. When he sacrificed, he'd trap a piece of the victim's essence in stones like that, fuel for his workings. The stone seemed to grow warmer in my palm, a faint vibration running through it. If you found that by the creek, it means the waters uncovered it. They've been searching for it. Agnes gestured to the windows where shadows now pressed against the glass. And you led them right to it. The moaning outside grew louder, joined by a rhythmic thumping like multiple fists pounding on the walls of the cabin. Rusty barked frantically, spinning in circles. "What do I do?" I asked, real panic setting in. Agnes's face was grim. "You've got two choices. Give them the stone and hope they're satisfied. Or what? Or give them something else they want more." Before I could ask what she meant, a tremendous crash shook the cabin. One of the windows shattered inward, showering the floor with glass. A long, pale limb snaked through the opening. Not an arm exactly, but something similar, jointed in too many places, ending in elongated fingers tipped with what looked like black talons. Agnes moved with surprising speed for her age, grabbing a jar from a shelf and flinging its contents at the probing limb. Whatever the substance was, it sizzled on contact. The appendage withdrew with a shriek that made my teeth ache. "That won't hold them long," Agnes said, already reaching for another jar. "Choose now, boy." The stone in my hand was definitely hot now, vibrating more intensely. The face in its surface seemed to be moving, mouth working as if trying to speak. "I'll give them the stone," I decided. "It's not mine anyway." Agnes nodded. "Might work, might not. They've had a taste of you now." She reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out a handful of dark powder. "Take this. When you run, and you will need to run, cast it behind you. Won't stop them, but it'll slow them some." My hand closed around the powder. It felt gritty, smelling of iron and something else I couldn't identify. "The main trail is east of here," she continued, grabbing more items from her shelves and stuffing them into a small leather bag. "Follow the brightest star you can see. Don't look back, no matter what you hear. And for God's sake, don't drop that stone until you're ready to give it to them." Another crash, this time at the door. Wood splintered as something heavy slammed against it. "Go out the back," Agnes ordered, thrusting the leather bag at me. "Through the root cellar. There's a tunnel. Comes out near the creek. Used it myself in desperate times." "Come with us," I urged, surprising myself with the offer. She smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "Can't. Someone's got to give you time." From beneath her chair, she pulled an ancient shotgun. "Been keeping the balance for 40 years. Reckon I can manage one last stand." The door shuttered again, hinges starting to give. "Go!" Agnes shouted, raising the shotgun. "Now!" I didn't wait to be told again. Following her pointing finger, I found a trap door partially hidden under a rag rug. Rusty whined but followed as I descended rough wooden steps into darkness. Behind me, the cabin door finally gave way with a crack like thunder. Agnes's shotgun roared once, twice. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A wet, tearing noise followed by a sigh that might have been resignation or release. The root cellar was pitch black once the trap door closed behind us. I fumbled for my phone, switching on its flashlight. The beam revealed a low tunnel cut into the earth, shored up with ancient timbers that groaned ominously above our heads. "Come on, boy," I whispered to Rusty. "Stay close." We moved as quickly as we dared, bent nearly double to avoid the low ceiling. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and decay, and twice my foot squelched in something I refused to examine too closely. The soul stone now burned almost painfully hot in my pocket. From behind us came sounds of pursuit. Not footsteps exactly, but a slithering, dragging noise punctuated by what might have been whispering or distant, manic laughter. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, the tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air filtered down, carrying the scent of pine and water. We emerged into moonlight beside the creek, which was now a rushing torrent where before it had been a gentle stream. The night was clear, stars sharp overhead. I oriented myself quickly, finding the brightest star in the eastern sky. That's when I saw them, figures standing among the trees on the far bank. The tall man from last night, the emaciated woman. Others too, shapes only partially human. Some crawling on all fours, others impossibly tall and thin, all watching us with eyes that reflected the moonlight like animals. The hollow folk, Volga's disciples, waiting. I pulled the stone from my pocket. In the moonlight, the face in its surface was unmistakable now. A young woman, features twisted in eternal anguish. "You want this?" I called across the water, holding it up. "Come and get it." I hurled the stone as far as I could, sending it arcing over the creek to land with a soft thud on the opposite bank. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as one, the figures surged toward where the stone had fallen, moving with that same unnatural fluidity I'd seen before. Too fast, too jerky, like film played at the wrong speed. "Run," I told Rusty, already turning east. "Run." We sprinted through the forest, guided only by glimpses of stars through the canopy. Behind us came sounds of pursuit again, but distant now, distracted by the stone. Still, I took no chances, occasionally casting handfuls of Agnes's powder behind us. Where it landed, the forest floor hissed and smoked, and the pursuing sounds temporarily faltered. The night seemed endless, the forest an infinite maze of identical trees. My lungs burned, legs trembling with exhaustion. Even Rusty was flagging, his breathing labored. But we kept moving, driven by the memory of those inhuman figures and the sounds from the cabin. Just when I thought we couldn't go any farther, the trees began to thin. The first gray light of dawn filtered through the canopy, and suddenly we were stumbling onto a gravel road. "The service road," I gasped, recognizing it from the trail map. "We're close to the ranger station." Rusty barked once, sharply, his attention fixed on something behind us. I turned, dreading what I might see. The forest at the road's edge was still dark, but something moved within that darkness. Shapes shifting and flowing like liquid shadow. They stopped at the tree line, not venturing onto the road itself. They won't cross, I realized. Can't leave the hollow. As if in answer, a voice drifted from the shadows. Agnes's voice, though changed, hollowed out. "One sacrifice a year," it said, her familiar cackle now a grating, multi-toned sound. "The balance must be maintained." I backed away, pulling Rusty with me. "We're leaving. Find someone else." "We'll be waiting," the voice promised. No longer just Agnes, but many voices speaking through her. The hollow remembers. The hollow waits. I turned and ran again, not stopping until the ranger station came into view, solid and blessedly normal in the growing light. Gus was just opening up, surprise registering on his weathered face as we staggered into the parking lot. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, taking in my torn clothes and wild eyes. "Something like that," I managed, voice raw. There's something wrong in Volga Hollow." Gus's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. "Woods can play tricks on folks not used to them, especially if they go off trail." "It wasn't tricks," I insisted. "There's a woman out there, Agnes, in a cabin. She might be hurt." His eyes narrowed slightly. "No cabins in the state forest, son. And no one named Agnes living around here that I know of." "But I was just there." I pulled out my phone, opening the map app to show him. But the GPS showed no record of our night's journey, just a straight line from our campsite to the ranger station, as if we'd never detoured at all. Gus watched me with a mixture of pity and wariness now. "Why don't you come inside, get some coffee, clean up a bit? I can call someone to come get you if you need." I almost argued further, but the look in his eyes stopped me. He didn't believe me. wouldn't believe me. And who would? A story about forest spirits and soul stones and a witch in a cabin that supposedly didn't exist. Yeah, I said finally. Coffee sounds good. They found Agnes's cabin 3 weeks later. At least that's what the article said. Remains of 19th century structure discovered in Yellow River State Forest. The archaeologists were excited about the find, speculating it might have belonged to early European settlers or perhaps a logging operation. They mentioned finding artifacts too: stone tools, ceramics, and unusual carved stones with markings reminiscent of faces. I tried calling the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the archaeological team, anyone who would listen. Most didn't return my calls. Those who did thanked me politely for my folk story contribution and said they'd add it to their records. One junior archaeologist, though, was more interested. She told me they'd found something else at the site: bones. Human bones, at least a dozen different individuals, dating back over 100 years. And animal bones too, arranged in patterns around the foundation of the cabin. The weird thing, she said, voice lowered like she was sharing a secret, is that we found fresh blood too, but no recent remains. It's like someone was just there, continuing whatever they were doing a century ago. She was taken off the project the next day. The site was cordoned off for safety reasons. The official report mentioned unstable ground and possible contamination. Yellow River State Forest remained open, but Volga Hollow Trail was permanently closed. As for me, I haven't gone camping since. Can't stand the sight of forests now, especially at night. Rusty still wakes me sometimes, growling at shadows in our apartment that stretch and move in ways shadows shouldn't. And sometimes, when it's very quiet, I hear whispers. My name in Agnes's voice, hollow and hungry. The balance must be maintained, she says. One sacrifice a year. I've started looking at apartments in other states, somewhere with very few trees, somewhere far from Iowa, because I know the hollow remembers, and sooner or later it will call me back. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2024. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the silence. That profound, unnatural quiet that falls like a shroud over the Shimek State Forest when autumn truly takes hold. No birds, no insects, just the occasional whisper of wind through nearly bare branches. Even Rex, my usually vocal German shepherd, lay eerily still beside me, his amber eyes fixed on the canvas roof of our tent. "What's wrong, buddy?" I whispered, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid morning air. Rex's ears twitched, but his gaze remained locked upward. I'd never seen him so focused, so afraid. I had chosen Shimek for its remoteness. Located in the southeastern corner of Iowa, it wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot, especially in late October when the leaf peepers had come and gone. That was exactly what I needed. Solitude, distance from the fragments of my shattered marriage, from the pitying glances of colleagues who knew too much about Laura's affair with my former best friend. 3 days in, the isolation had been therapeutic. Until now. Outside, frost had transformed the forest floor into a silvery carpet. I noted my breath growing heavier as I laced up my hiking boots. Rex still hadn't moved. "Come on, boy. Breakfast time." I unzipped the tent and stepped into the clearing. Our campsite was simple: a 2-person tent, a small fire pit I'd constructed with stones from nearby, and my SUV parked about 50 yards away on the narrow access road. The temperature must have dropped significantly overnight. The pond at the edge of our clearing had a thin sheet of ice across its surface. Strange for October, even in Iowa. As I prepared to light the portable stove, I realized something was missing. My backpack. The one containing our food, my satellite phone, and, most critically, my medication. "Rex," I called sharply. "Where's the pack?" The dog finally emerged from the tent but moved cautiously, his body low to the ground, tail tucked. He sniffed the air, then whined, a sound so mournful it raised the hair on my arms. I searched the campsite methodically, fighting the rising panic. Without my antipsychotics, I had maybe 36 hours before the shadows started moving again, before the whispers returned. I'd been stable for years, had this trip meticulously planned. The backpack had been right outside the tent when I'd gone to sleep. 10 minutes of increasingly frantic searching yielded nothing. The forest around us remained unnaturally quiet, the morning mist hanging between trees like ghostly curtains. That's when I noticed the tracks. They led from our campsite toward the Lick Creek area, deeper into the forest. Human footprints, roughly my size, but with something off about them. They seemed to drag slightly, as if whoever made them was injured, or carrying something heavy. My backpack. Someone's been here, I muttered to Rex, who growled softly in response. While we were sleeping. I checked my watch, 7:23 a.m. My last dose had been yesterday evening around 8 p.m. The medication's half-life meant I still had time before things got bad. If I could retrieve my pack quickly, this would just become an unsettling anecdote, rather than a psychiatric emergency. Come on, Rex, we're tracking. I grabbed my hunting knife and flashlight, the only useful tools I had left, and started following the prints. The fog thickened as we moved deeper into the forest. Shimek wasn't particularly large as state forests go, but it contained pockets of old-growth timber that had never been logged, areas where the underbrush grew dense and the canopy blocked most sunlight. The footprints led us toward one such area, a section locals called the Hollow, a depression surrounded by limestone bluffs where early settlers had reportedly disappeared in the 1840s. I'd planned to avoid the Hollow entirely. The park ranger in Farmington had warned me about it when I'd registered my campsite. Flash floods through there, Ranger Garrett had said, not meeting my eyes. Even when it ain't rained, and them sinkholes can open up without warning. Lost a search dog there last spring. Just vanished. But the footprints led directly toward it, and my backpack contained my lifeline to sanity. The path descended sharply. Rex stayed close, occasionally emitting low growls that vibrated through his body. The trees grew denser, older, with gnarled trunks and branches that seemed to reach toward us like arthritic fingers. The fog congealed around us, reducing visibility to perhaps 20 feet in any direction. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding flat and dead in the mist. "I know someone took my pack. I just need my medication. You can keep everything else." Only silence answered. But as we descended further into the hollow, I began to notice small cairns of stacked stones appearing beside the path. They looked recently assembled, the stones still clean of moss or lichen. Some were simple three-stone stacks, others were more elaborate constructions that defied gravity. Rex refused to go near them, giving each a wide berth. The footprints we'd been following suddenly multiplied, as if our mysterious thief had been joined by others. 3, maybe 4 additional sets of prints, all converging and continuing deeper into the hollow. My watch read 9:17 a.m. when we reached the bottom of the depression. Here, the fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The temperature had dropped further, and an unnatural stillness pressed against my eardrums. The footprints now led toward a dark opening in the limestone bluff, a cave entrance partly obscured by hanging vines. Rex stopped dead, his hackles raised, a continuous growl rumbling from deep in his chest. "Is someone there?" I called toward the cave. "Please, I just need my medication." A whisper floated from the darkness, so faint I wasn't entirely sure I'd heard it. But Rex had. His growl intensified. I switched on my flashlight and directed its beam into the cave mouth. The light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, illuminating only a few feet of damp stone floor. Water dripped somewhere inside, the sound echoing oddly. "Last chance," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need that pack." Something moved in the darkness, not walking, but skittering, like multiple limbs scrabbling against stone. My rational mind, the part maintained by carefully calibrated doses of medication, told me it was probably an animal. A raccoon, or perhaps a fox that had claimed the cave. The less rational part, the part that would soon take over without my meds, whispered darker possibilities. "Rex, stay," I commanded and stepped toward the cave entrance. The smell hit me first, a nauseating combination of rot and something chemical, like formaldehyde. I gagged but pressed forward, keeping my flashlight beam trained ahead. The cave extended farther than I'd expected, widening into a chamber after about 20 feet, and there, propped against the far wall, was my backpack. Relief surged through me, quickly followed by suspicion. This was too easy. I sweeped my flashlight around the chamber, revealing damp walls covered in some kind of dark growth. Not moss, but something that seemed to pulse slightly in the beam of light. The walls weren't natural either. Though made of limestone like the surrounding bluffs, they bore marks, hundreds of them, gouged into the stone. Some resembled letters from alphabets I didn't recognize. Others were crude pictographs of stick figures surrounding what appeared to be a many-limbed entity. I approached my backpack cautiously, Rex's growls from the cave entrance echoing behind me. When I reached it, I quickly unzipped the main compartment. My medication bottle was right on top, exactly where I'd left it. Too convenient. I opened the bottle with trembling fingers and examined the pills inside. They looked right, small white tablets with the correct markings, but something about their placement gnawed at me. Why leave the medication if that's what the thief had wanted me to find? A faint scratching sound came from deeper in the cave, beyond the chamber. I swung my flashlight toward it and glimpsed movement, something retreating further into the darkness, something that moved in a way nothing should move. I grabbed my backpack and retreated toward the entrance, never turning my back on the deeper darkness. Rex's growls had transformed into high-pitched whines of distress. Outside the cave, the fog had grown even thicker, reducing visibility to just a few feet. I couldn't even see the path we'd descended. "We need to get back to camp," I told Rex, trying to keep panic from my voice. I took out my compass, but the needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. My watch had stopped at 9:17, though it felt like I'd spent at least 20 minutes in the cave. I dry swallowed one of my pills, then shouldered my pack. Uphill, I decided. The hollow is a depression. If we just keep climbing, we'll reach the rim. We set off in what I hoped was the right direction, the fog swallowing us immediately. The cairns seemed to have multiplied during our time in the cave, appearing every few yards along our path. Some were now over 5 feet tall, constructed with stones that must have weighed 30 pounds or more, physically impossible structures. The forest had gone completely silent. Not even the sound of our footsteps seemed to carry. The only noise was Rex's continued whining and my own increasingly labored breathing as we climbed. I began to feel watched. Not the generalized sensation of unease one might experience alone in the woods, but a specific, focused attention. Eyes, many eyes, tracking our progress. "Who's there?" I called, my voice immediately muffled by the fog. The whispers started then, not from any particular direction, but seeming to emerge from the fog itself. Indistinct at first, then coalescing into words I almost recognized. Almost, but not quite, as if the speaker had learned English phonetically without understanding its meaning. "Danielle," came the drawn-out approximation of my name. "We have waged you." I froze. Rex pressed against my leg, trembling. "Who's there?" I demanded again, rotating slowly, knife raised. The fog parted briefly, revealing a figure about 30 yards away. Human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly distorted. It stood perfectly still among the trees, and though I couldn't make out a face in the mist, I felt its gaze lock onto mine. "You're not real," I said, more to myself than the figure. "It's starting already. The medication hasn't had time to work." The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle, then took one gliding step forward before the fog closed around it again. "Run," I told Rex. And we did. We scrambled uphill, no longer caring about following any path. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but terror drove me forward. Rex easily outpaced me but kept doubling back, unwilling to leave me behind. The whispering followed us, seeming to come from all directions at once. "The medicine is not real, yell. We made it from the fungus, from us." My stomach lurched. I'd taken one of the pills. I frantically pulled out my water bottle, tried to make myself vomit, but it was too late. Whatever I'd swallowed was already in my system. The fog began to take on colors, sickly greens and pulsing purples swirling together. The trees seemed to bend toward us as we passed, reaching with finger-like branches. I told myself it was the onset of hallucinations, that none of it was real, but the cold, rational part of my brain, the part still clinging to reality, noted that Rex was reacting to the same phenomena. Dogs don't share human delusions. We broke through into a small clearing, and I realized with horror that we'd somehow circled back to the cave entrance. The cairns had multiplied exponentially, now numbering in the hundreds, surrounding the clearing in concentric circles. At the center stood a crude altar of flat stones, dark stains marking its surface. 5 figures now stood at the edges of the clearing, all with the same elongated proportions as the one I'd glimpsed earlier. The fog made their features indistinct, but I could see they wore tattered clothing of different styles and from different eras. One in what appeared to be a pioneer woman's dress, another in 1970s hiking gear, a third in modern camouflage hunting attire. "What do you want?" I shouted, the words slurring slightly. Whatever had been in that pill was taking effect rapidly. The figures began to move, not toward us but around the perimeter of the clearing, circling slowly. Their movements were jerky, puppet-like, as if their joints bent in too many places. "We are the Hollow," came the whispered response, seeming to emanate from all 5 simultaneously. "We have always been here, before the trees, before your kind." Rex backed against my legs, his growl now interspersed with terrified whimpers. "Let us leave," I pleaded, my vision starting to blur at the edges. "We won't come back, won't tell anyone." "But you sought us, Daniel Mercer." The tallest figure spoke alone now, its voice a dry rustle like dead leaves. "Your mind calls to our kind, the darkness in you, the voices you silence with your medicine." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. "How do you know about that?" "We taste thoughts," another figure said, this one wearing what looked like a park ranger uniform. With a jolt, I recognized the name badge, Garrett. "Sweet thoughts, bitter thoughts, broken minds are easiest to inhabit." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're inside them? Controlling them?" "Wearing," corrected the figure in the pioneer dress, moving closer. In the shifting fog, I glimpsed her face, or what remained of it. The skin was pulled too tight over the skull, split in places to reveal not bone but something dark and fibrous beneath. Like clothes, but clothes wear out. I backed away, pulling Rex with me. The dog was fully panicking now, alternating between growls and high-pitched keening. "We've watched you, Daniel," said the Garrett thing. 3 days, alone, broken, perfect." My vision swam, dark tendrils creeping in from the periphery. Whatever they'd given me was nothing like my medication. I felt my consciousness being pushed aside, compressed into a smaller and smaller corner of my own mind. Something else was expanding to fill the space, something ancient and cold and hungry. "No," I gasped, dropping to my knees. "Get out of my head." The figures moved closer, forming a loose circle around Rex and me. Up close, I could see the wrongness more clearly, the way their skin rippled occasionally, as if something moved underneath, the strange angles of their limbs, the eyes that reflected no light. "Your dog first," whispered the pioneer woman thing. "Then you. New clothes for the oldest ones." They lunged for Rex. What happened next saved both our lives, though I've replayed it countless times since, wondering if I could have done anything differently. Rex, driven by pure animal terror, broke through their circle, bolting for the trees. 3 of the creatures immediately gave chase, moving with that same unsettling, gliding gait. The remaining 2, Garrett and the pioneer woman, turned back to me. I was on all fours now, fighting to remain conscious as the foreign presence in my mind grew stronger. "Your resistance is unexpected," Garrett said, head tilting at that unnatural angle. "The fungus usually works faster." "What, are you?" I managed to ask, fingers digging into the cold earth, trying to anchor myself to something real. "We have no word you would understand," the pioneer woman replied. "We were here when the great ice retreated. We will be here when your kind is dust." She reached for me with elongated fingers that ended not in nails, but in something like hardened wood. As her hand neared my face, I saw the skin of her palm split open, revealing a dark cavity filled with what looked like thousands of writhing black threads. The presence in my mind surged, and with it came images, flashes of memory that weren't mine. People lost in these woods over centuries, their terror as they realized something was inside them, controlling their movements. Their silent screaming as they watched their bodies return to civilization, spreading spores, luring others back to the hollow. Decades, sometimes centuries, of helpless awareness as their bodies deteriorated around the fungal network that had replaced their nervous systems. In desperation, I lunged for my hunting knife, which had fallen to the ground. My movements were sluggish, uncoordinated, but my fingers closed around the handle. The pioneer woman's hand touched my cheek, the skin splitting further, the black threads beginning to emerge. I felt them touch my skin. Damp, cold, seeking entry. With every ounce of strength I had left, I drove the knife into her chest. There was no blood. Instead, a cloud of dark spores erupted from the wound, engulfing my face. I fell back, gasping and choking, inadvertently inhaling them. The effect was immediate and devastating. The presence in my mind exploded in size, and I felt myself being crushed, compressed into nothingness. My last conscious thought was of Laura, how she would never know what happened to me. Then darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. Cold, pain, the taste of soil, the sensation of being dragged. I opened my eyes to darkness and the rhythmic jolting of movement. I was being pulled by my feet across the forest floor. Above me, tree branches cut black patterns against a night sky scattered with stars. I tried to speak but could produce only a weak moan. My entire body felt wrong, simultaneously numb and in agony, as if every nerve ending had been scraped raw. The dragging stopped. A face appeared above me, a hiker in his 20s with a concerned expression. "Hey, you're awake. Thank God," he said. "Don't try to move. You're pretty messed up." I managed to turn my head slightly, taking in my surroundings. We were on a trail, heading uphill. The fog was gone, and the forest seemed normal. I could hear insects and the occasional distant call of a bird. "Your dog found me," the young man explained, gesturing to his right. Rex stood nearby, alert and watchful, apparently unharmed. When he saw me looking, his tail gave a tentative wag. "I'm Tyler," the hiker continued. "I was camping at Donaldson Point when your dog showed up, barking like crazy. Led me right to you. You were collapsed in a sinkhole about a half-mile back. Lucky he found help. You've got a nasty head wound and you're burning up with fever." I tried to process this information through the fog in my brain. Sinkhole, head wound, none of it matched my memories of the hollow, the cave, the fungal entities. "How long?" I croaked. "How long were you out there?" "No idea, man. I found you about an hour ago. Your campsite registration says you've been in the park for 3 days. Search and rescue is on the way. Just hang tight." I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. When I opened them again, Tyler was on his satellite phone, confirming coordinates with someone. "My pack?" I managed to ask. Tyler glanced down at me. "It's here. Your dog was guarding it when I found you. Smart animal." With tremendous effort, I gestured for the backpack. Tyler hesitated, then helped prop me up slightly and brought the pack within reach. My hands trembled violently as I opened it and searched for my medication. The bottle was there, apparently untouched. I shook out a pill and showed it to Tyler. "Need this," I gasped. Tyler looked uncertain but helped me take the medication with water from his own bottle. The familiar shape and taste of my actual prescription was profoundly reassuring. As the legitimate medication began to take effect, my thoughts slowly cleared. The memories of the hollow remained, but now I could view them through the lens of my condition. I had stopped taking my medication. That much was real. The rest, the cave, the fungal entities, the possession, had been a psychotic episode triggered by the abrupt withdrawal. "There were people," I said, my voice stronger now, "in the woods." Tyler looked uncomfortable. "The ranger said you were camping alone." "No, others. Watching me. Look, man, you had a serious fall. Probably been hallucinating from the fever. Just rest until the rescue team gets here." I wanted to believe him. Desperately wanted the entire experience to have been a product of my illness. But something nagged at the edges of my consciousness. Details that didn't fit the psychotic episode explanation. How had I ended up in a sinkhole when my last clear memory was of being in the cave? Why was Rex unharmed if I'd been delirious and wandering through dangerous terrain? And, most troublingly, if it had all been hallucination, why did I still feel the lingering presence at the back of my mind, temporarily subdued by the medication, but waiting, watching? The search and rescue team arrived 20 minutes later, 2 rangers with a stretcher and emergency medical equipment. They efficiently assessed my condition, bandaged my head wound, and strapped me to the stretcher. Rex was allowed to walk alongside as they carried me up to the access road where an ambulance waited. One of the rangers looked familiar. Not Garrett, but someone similar. The same build, the same way of avoiding direct eye contact. "Lucky your dog found help," he commented as they loaded me into the ambulance. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. Animals usually avoid the hollow. I stared at him. I hadn't told anyone where I'd been. "I didn't say where I was," I whispered. The ranger smiled slightly. "Park's not that big. Hollow's the only place with sinkholes." As the ambulance doors began to close, he leaned closer and whispered, "The medicine only works for so long, Daniel. We're patient. We'll be watching." The doors shut, and the ambulance pulled away. Rex sat beside my stretcher, his body pressed reassuringly against the side. I ran my fingers through his fur, trying to find comfort in his solid, warm presence. The EMT checking my vitals smiled at me. "Your dog's a hero. Not many would have left their owner to find help." I nodded weakly, not trusting myself to speak. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that Rex had never left my side during the entire ordeal. Whatever had led Tyler to me, it hadn't been my dog. As the ambulance wound its way out of Shemek State Forest, I stared out the small rear windows. The trees seemed to bend toward us as we passed, reaching with finger-like branches against the darkening sky. And just for a moment, in the deepening shadows between their trunks, I glimpsed tall, thin figures, standing perfectly still, watching the ambulance depart. The presence in the back of my mind stirred, and I heard the whisper one last time. "We'll be waiting, Daniel. When the medicine fails." 2 days later, I was released from the hospital in Fort Madison with a diagnosis of concussion, mild dehydration, and probable acute stress reaction. The psychiatrist who evaluated me increased my medication dosage and scheduled follow-up appointments. No one mentioned fungal spores or possession or entities in the hollow. Those details remained locked inside me, dismissed as delusions by everyone who heard them. I moved out of Iowa the following week, leaving no forwarding address. Rex and I now live in a small apartment in Chicago, surrounded by concrete and steel and millions of people. I've convinced myself that whatever happened in Shemek State Forest cannot reach us here. But sometimes, when it rains and the air grows damp, I feel the presence stir in the back of my mind. On those nights, Rex stares at the corners of our apartment, growling softly at shadows no one else can see. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch my reflection smiling when I am not. My name is Marcus Winters, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023. I've always been the outdoorsy type. Growing up in Des Moines meant that any real wilderness experience required some travel, but my father made sure we went camping at least twice a year. Those childhood trips instilled in me a love for the outdoors that never faded, even as adult responsibilities piled up. When my best friend Ethan suggested a weekend backpacking trip to Yellow River State Forest in northeastern Iowa, I jumped at the chance. It had been nearly 8 months since my divorce was finalized, and I needed to clear my head. Ethan knew this, which is why he proposed the trip in the first place. "Just us, the trees, and no cell service," he had said with a grin. "Doctor's orders." Ethan had been my rock through the separation. While other friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the messy emotions of a disintegrating marriage, Ethan had shown up at my apartment with beer and takeout every Friday night. He listened without judgment when I needed to vent and knew when to change the subject when my thoughts spiraled. Yellow River is the largest state forest in Iowa, spanning nearly 8,500 acres of dense woodlands, limestone bluffs, and winding trails along the Mississippi River. October meant the forest would be ablaze with autumn colors: red maples, golden oaks, and the deep burgundy of sumac. The weather forecast promised crisp days and cool nights, perfect for hiking. Our plan was simple: a 3-day trek through the Paint Creek unit, camping at different sites each night. We'd follow the Oak Ridge Trail to Fire Tower Trail, then loop back via the Yellow River Trail. Nothing too ambitious, but enough to feel like we'd earned our whiskey by the campfire each night. I packed light, just the essentials in my weathered Osprey backpack: sleeping bag, one-person tent, water filter, first aid kit, headlamp, extra socks, and enough dehydrated meals to get by. Ethan and I had agreed to each bring a flask of whiskey. Mine contained Bullet bourbon. His held Jameson. The 2-hour drive from Cedar Rapids, where Ethan lived, to the forest was filled with easy conversation and nostalgic playlists. We arrived at the Paint Creek unit parking lot around noon on Friday, shouldered our packs, and set off on the trail. The first day's hike was uneventful, in the best possible way. We covered about 6 miles, stopping occasionally to admire particularly spectacular views. The forest was hushed, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant calls of birds. We reached our first campsite, a small clearing near Heffern's Point, with plenty of daylight left to set up our tents and gather firewood. That night, we sat around a crackling fire, passing Ethan's flask back and forth as we reminisced about previous adventures and made vague plans for future trips. The familiar weight of my wedding ring was absent from my finger, a phantom sensation I had yet to get used to. Ethan carefully avoided mentioning Amanda, steering our conversation toward neutral territory whenever my expression darkened. "Did you hear that?" Ethan asked suddenly, interrupting a story about his latest disastrous date. I paused, listening. The forest had gone silent. No insects chirping, no rustling leaves, just the pop and crackle of our fire. "Probably just a deer," I said after a moment. "Or maybe a raccoon eyeing our food." Ethan nodded, but his eyes continued to scan the darkness beyond our firelight. "I'm going to turn in," I said, stifling a yawn. "Early start tomorrow." Ethan nodded, still distracted. "I'll be there in a bit, just going to make sure the fire's out properly." In my tent, I settled into my sleeping bag, the ground beneath my sleeping pad uneven but not uncomfortable. The bourbon had done its work, and I felt my eyelids growing heavy. Just before sleep claimed me, I heard Ethan zipping up his own tent. the nightmare came without warning. In it, I was wandering through a forest that looked like Yellow River but wasn't quite right. The trees were too tall, their branches reaching down like grasping fingers. I was searching for Amanda, hearing her voice call my name from different directions. When I finally found her, she was standing with her back to me in a small clearing. Relief flooded through me until she turned around. Where her face should have been was only smooth, blank skin. I jolted awake, heart hammering in my chest. The inside of my tent was pitch black. My watch read 3:17 a.m. Something had woken me. A sound outside. I lay still, listening. There it was again. A soft, rhythmic tapping against a tree trunk. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. "Ethan," I called softly. No response from the neighboring tent. The tapping continued, neither speeding up nor slowing down. It was too regular to be a branch moving in the wind. Too deliberate. I unzipped my sleeping bag and fumbled for my headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness as I slipped on my boots and unzipped my tent. The night air hit me like a cold shower, instantly banishing the last cobwebs of sleep. Ethan's tent was zipped up tight. I whispered his name again, not wanting to wake him if he was asleep, but the tapping was making me uneasy. No response. I swept my light across our campsite. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint red glow. Our backpacks were where we'd left them, hung from a tree branch to keep them away from curious animals. Nothing seemed disturbed. The tapping continued, drawing my attention to the edge of our clearing. I directed my light toward the sound. There, standing just at the tree line, was a figure. My heart stuttered in my chest. The figure was humanoid, but somehow wrong. Too tall and too thin to be natural. It was tapping one impossibly long finger against a tree trunk in that same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I blinked hard, convinced I was still dreaming. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. "What the hell?" I whispered, rubbing my eyes. The tapping had stopped. The night was silent again. I stood there for several minutes, scanning the trees with my headlamp, but saw nothing unusual. Eventually, I chalked it up to a combination of bourbon, stress, and an overactive imagination. I returned to my tent and tried to sleep, but rest eluded me for the remainder of the night. At dawn, I emerged bleary-eyed and on edge. Ethan was already up, boiling water on his small camping stove. "You look like hell," he greeted me cheerfully. "Didn't sleep well," I admitted, accepting the cup of instant coffee he offered. "Had a weird experience in the middle of the night." I told him about the tapping and the figure, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, his expression grew serious. "I heard tapping too," he said. "Around 3 maybe. I thought it was you getting up to pee." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Did you see anything?" Ethan shook his head. "Heard it, didn't see it. Fell back asleep pretty quick." We ate breakfast in silence, the easy camaraderie of the previous day somewhat diminished. As we packed up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I caught myself scanning the trees, half expecting to see the tall, thin figure from the night before. The second day's hike was more strenuous, taking us up and down ravines as we followed the fire tower trail. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction from my lingering unease. By mid-afternoon, my shoulders ached from my pack, and my earlier anxiety had mostly dissipated in the warm autumn sunlight. We reached the old fire tower around 3 p.m. It stood like a sentinel in a clearing, a steel skeleton rising above the treetops. A sign warned against climbing the structure, noting its age and questionable stability. "Dare you to go up," Ethan said with a mischievous grin. I snorted. "No thanks, I prefer my bones unbroken." Ethan shrugged and dropped his pack. Before I could protest, he grabbed the lowest rung of the ladder and began to climb. "Ethan, are you crazy? Get down from there." He ignored me, continuing his ascent. The tower swayed slightly with each movement. the metal groaning in protest. I watched, heart in my throat, as my friend climbed higher and higher. When he reached the small platform at the top, he whooped triumphantly. "The view is incredible! You can see forever up here." "Great! Now get down before you kill yourself," I called up to him. Ethan was scanning the horizon. "Hey, there's some kind of light out there." "What do you mean, a light? It's the middle of the afternoon." "I don't know how to describe it. Not sunlight. More like fireflies, but bigger, and in a cluster." His voice had lost its playful edge. "Ethan, seriously, that tower is not safe. Please come down." He continued to stare off into the distance for a moment longer before beginning his descent. When his feet hit solid ground again, I released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Don't ever do that again," I said, shoving his shoulder. Ethan's expression was thoughtful. "There's something out there, Marcus." "Yeah, trees. Lots and lots of trees." I hefted my pack. "Come on, we've got another couple of miles before our next campsite." As we hiked, Ethan kept looking over his shoulder, scanning the forest canopy as if trying to spot whatever lights he'd seen from the tower. His behavior was starting to make me nervous. "What exactly did you see up there?" I finally asked as we crossed a small stream, stepping carefully on slippery rocks. "I told you, lights, like a cluster of them, moving together through the trees." He hesitated. "They were heading in the same direction we are." I wanted to dismiss his concern, but the memory of the tall figure from the previous night kept me from scoffing. "Probably just hikers, or maybe hunters, though I didn't think hunting was allowed in this part of the forest." "It wasn't hikers," Ethan said firmly. "It was too high up, in the canopy, and the movement was all wrong. Too fluid, too coordinated." We reached our second campsite just as the sun was beginning to set. Unlike the previous night's open clearing, this spot was nestled among towering pines, their dense branches creating a natural canopy overhead. The site was marked on our map as Booth's Hollow, named after an early settler in the area. We went through the motions of setting up camp, but there was a tension between us that hadn't been there before. Ethan kept pausing in his tasks to stare off into the trees, and I found myself jumping at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. As darkness fell, we built a fire and prepared our dehydrated meals in silence. I pulled out my flask of bourbon, but after a single sip, I recapped it. I wanted to keep my wits about me tonight. "We should leave tomorrow," Ethan said suddenly. "First thing in the morning. Skip the last day and head back to the car." I studied my friend's face in the flickering firelight. Ethan wasn't the anxious type. If anything, he was the one who usually pushed for more risk, more adventure. Seeing him spooked was unsettling. "Because of some lights you might have seen?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Because something doesn't feel right out here," he replied. "You felt it too, last night, with that thing you saw." I couldn't argue with that. There was something off about the forest, a wrongness I couldn't quite articulate. The usual peace I found in nature had been replaced by a gnawing unease. "Okay," I agreed. "We'll head back tomorrow. Cut the trip short." Relief washed over Ethan's features. "Thanks, man. I know it sounds crazy, but—" A scream cut through the night, high-pitched and agonized. It came from somewhere in the forest to our east, maybe a quarter-mile away. Both of us jumped to our feet. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, as if whatever had made the sound might hear us. "A person. It sounded like a woman," Ethan replied, his voice equally hushed. The scream came again, closer this time. It started as human but ended in something else, a gurgling, inhuman wail that made the hair on my arms stand on end. "We need to help," Ethan said, already reaching for his headlamp. I grabbed his arm. "Are you insane? We have no idea what's out there." "What if someone's hurt or lost?" His eyes pleaded with me. "We can't just ignore it." The moral dilemma twisted in my gut. What if someone really was injured? Could I live with myself if I stayed safely by the fire while a fellow hiker suffered? "Fine," I relented. But we stick together and we bring the bear spray, and at the first sign of anything weird, we turn back. We gathered our headlamps, the bear spray, and a first aid kit. As an afterthought, I shoved my hunting knife into my belt. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. The forest at night was a different world, a maze of shadows and looming shapes. Our headlamp beams cut narrow paths through the darkness, illuminating trees that seemed to reach for us with skeletal branches. We moved slowly, calling out occasionally. "Hello? Is anyone there? Do you need help?" No response except for the soft hooting of an owl and the rustling of night creatures. We had been walking for about 10 minutes when Ethan suddenly stopped. "Listen," he whispered. I held my breath. At first I heard nothing. Then it came, the same rhythmic tapping I'd heard the night before. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. "That's what I heard last night," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "It's coming from over there." Ethan pointed to our right. Against my better judgment, we adjusted our course to follow the sound. The tapping grew louder as we approached until we emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk at least 4 feet in diameter, and circling the tree, one finger extended to tap against the bark, was the figure I had seen the previous night. In the combined glow of our headlamps, I could see it clearly now. It was humanoid, but wrong in every way. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at impossible angles. Its skin was a sickly grayish-white, taut over a skeletal frame. Where a face should have been was a smooth, featureless expanse of skin, broken only by a small, lipless mouth. Beside me, Ethan made a choking sound of terror. The creature's head swiveled toward us with a fluidity that reminded me of an owl. Though it had no eyes, I knew it was looking at us. "Run," I whispered. We turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for stealth or direction. Branches whipped at my face and roots threatened to trip me with every step. My lungs burned as panic drove me faster than I thought possible. I don't know how long we ran before I realized Ethan was no longer beside me. I skidded to a halt, gasping for breath. "Ethan!" I called, my voice hoarse. No answer. I turned in a circle, the beam of my headlamp cutting through the darkness. Trees, bushes, more trees. No sign of my friend. "Ethan!" I called again, louder this time. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, fumbling for the bear spray at my belt. "Hey, it's just me," Ethan said, emerging from behind a large pine. "I zigged when you zagged. Got a bit turned around." Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by concern. There was something off about Ethan's voice, a flatness that hadn't been there before, and he was moving strangely, his normally fluid gait now stiff and mechanical. "Are you hurt?" I asked, keeping my distance. "No, I'm fine," he replied, smiling. The expression didn't reach his eyes. "We should get back to camp." I hesitated. This was Ethan, my best friend of 20 years, the man who had seen me through my darkest times. And yet, instinct was screaming at me that something was very wrong. "Which way is camp?" I asked, testing him. Ethan pointed without hesitation. "That way, about a quarter mile." He was pointing east. Our camp was to the west. "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lead the way." Ethan turned and began walking in the direction he had indicated. I followed a few paces behind, my hand wrapped around the bear spray. My mind raced with terrible possibilities. Was Ethan in shock? Concussed from a fall I hadn't witnessed? Or was this not Ethan at all? We walked for several minutes, going deeper into the forest rather than back toward our campsite. I knew I needed to make a decision soon, continue following this strange version of my friend or strike out on my own to find our camp. "Ethan," I called. "Stop for a second." He halted and turned to face me. In the beam of my headlamp, his face looked waxy and unnatural. "What's my ex-wife's name?" I asked. Ethan's expression didn't change. "Why are you asking me that?" "Just humor me." A long pause. "Sarah," he finally said. My stomach dropped. Amanda, not Sarah. This thing wasn't Ethan. Right, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. Just checking. I took a step backward. I think I dropped my knife back there. Give me a second to find it. Not Ethan's smile widened unnaturally. I'll help you look. No, I said too quickly. I mean, no need. You stay here. I'll be right back. Before he could respond, I turned and sprinted back the way we had come. I heard a sound behind me, not footsteps, but a rapid, scuttling noise like too many limbs moving at once. I didn't look back. I ran blindly, changing direction whenever the terrain forced me to, with no idea if I was heading toward camp or deeper into the wilderness. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and the thing pretending to be Ethan as possible. Eventually, my burning lungs and leaden legs forced me to slow. I leaned against a tree, gulping air, straining to hear any sounds of pursuit. The forest was eerily silent. Once I caught my breath, I tried to orient myself. Without a compass, and with the dense tree canopy blocking the stars, I had only my general sense of direction to guide me. I believed the Paint Creek Trail was to the north, which should eventually lead me back to our car if I could find it. I began walking again, more cautiously now, stopping frequently to listen. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. No insects chirping, no nocturnal creatures rustling in the underbrush. As if everything was hiding. After what felt like hours of tense hiking, I spotted a faint glow through the trees. Firelight. Hope surged through me. Had I somehow found my way back to our campsite? I approached cautiously, keeping low and moving from tree to tree for cover. As I drew closer, I could make out a clearing with a small campfire burning in the center. But it wasn't our campsite. This clearing was larger, and around the fire sat 5 figures. From my position behind a large oak, I could see them clearly in the firelight. They appeared to be people, 3 men and 2 women, dressed in ordinary hiking clothes. They were passing a bottle between them, laughing and talking, though from this distance I couldn't make out what they were saying. I hesitated. Should I approach them? Ask for help? But after the encounter with the thing pretending to be Ethan, I was reluctant to trust anyone or anything in these woods. As I watched, trying to decide what to do, a 6th figure emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. It was Ethan, the real Ethan. I thought at first because he was moving normally. He walked into the firelight and the 5 people looked up at him. "Hello," I heard him call. "Thank God, I thought I was alone out here." The 5 figures around the fire didn't respond. They didn't move at all. As I watched in growing horror, their faces began to shift. Features melted away, leaving smooth, blank expanses of skin. Only their mouths remained, stretching wider and wider until they split their faces in half. Ethan must have seen the transformation because he suddenly turned to run. He didn't make it 3 steps before the creatures were on him, moving with that same uncanny speed I had witnessed earlier. Their limbs elongated as they reached for him, fingers extending into terrible claws. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream as they dragged Ethan to the ground. Their bodies hunched over his, obscuring my view of what they were doing to him. But I could hear his screams, the same horrible sound we had followed into the forest. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran, Ethan's screams echoing in my ears. Tears blurred my vision as I fled, but I didn't slow down. My friend was gone. There was nothing I could do for him now except survive to tell someone what had happened. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the forest floor. Sobs racked my body as I curled into a ball, trying to muffle the sounds of my grief. I had left him, left Ethan to die alone in the darkness. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I drifted into a fitful sleep right there on the ground. I awoke to gray dawn light filtering through the trees. My body was stiff from sleeping on the cold earth, and my mouth tasted like ashes. For a blissful moment, I didn't remember the events of the previous night. Then it all came flooding back, the creature impersonating Ethan, my flight through the forest, and the horrible scene at the campfire. I sat up slowly, wincing at my sore muscles. Looking around, I tried to get my bearings. I was in a small depression between two fallen logs which had provided some minimal shelter during the night. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird call, normal sounds that I found reassuring after the unnatural silence of the night before. I had lost my backpack during my panicked flight, which meant I had no water, no food, and no map. All I had was the clothes on my back, my headlamp, now useless in daylight, the bear spray still attached to my belt, and my hunting knife. First things first, I needed to find water. Dehydration would kill me faster than anything else. I remembered from our map that Paint Creek ran through this part of the forest. If I could find it, I could follow it downstream toward the forest entrance. I set off in what I hoped was a northerly direction, looking for any sign of sloping terrain that might lead to a watercourse. The morning air was crisp, and under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the hike. Golden sunlight dappled the forest floor, and the autumn leaves formed a vibrant canopy overhead. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful scene with the horrors of the night before. After about an hour of walking, I heard the blessed sound of running water. A few hundred yards more, and I came upon Paint Creek, a clear, swift-flowing stream about 15 feet across. I fell to my knees at the edge and drank deeply, not caring about potential parasites or bacteria. Survival now, worry about Giardia later. Once my thirst was quenched, I stood and looked both upstream and downstream, trying to decide which way to go. Downstream should eventually lead me to civilization, but it might take longer than following one of the established trails back to the parking lot. If I could find a trail marker, I'd know exactly where I was. I decided to follow the creek downstream but stay close enough to the higher ground to spot any trail markers. As I walked, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The creatures had seemed nocturnal, but I couldn't be sure they wouldn't hunt by day as well. Around midday, my stomach was growling fiercely, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since dinner the previous night. I knew some basics about foraging, but autumn wasn't the best season for edible plants. Still, I managed to find some wild blackberries, their tart sweetness a poor but welcome substitute for a proper meal. As I continued downstream, the terrain began to look familiar. I realized I was approaching the area where Ethan and I had first entered the forest. Hope surged through me. The parking lot couldn't be far now. The crack of a branch breaking behind me sent ice through my veins. I froze, then slowly turned around. There, about 20 yards away, stood Ethan. But it wasn't Ethan, I knew immediately. This thing had his face, his clothes, but the posture was all wrong. Too rigid, like a mannequin. And the eyes. The eyes were empty. "Marcus," it called, using Ethan's voice perfectly. "Where have you been, man? I've been looking everywhere for you." I didn't respond. My hand went to the bear spray at my belt. "You okay?" Not Ethan took a step toward me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Stay back," I warned, my voice steadier than I felt. Not Ethan's head tilted to one side, an expression of concern on its stolen face. "What's wrong? It's me, Ethan." "You're not Ethan," I said. "I saw what happened to Ethan last night." The thing's expression didn't change, but something shifted in its eyes. A coldness, a calculation. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I'm right here. Let's get back to the car. We can talk about it on the drive home." It took another step toward me. I pulled out the bear spray, pointing it at the creature. "I said, stay back." Not Ethan raised its hands in a placating gesture. "Whoa, easy there. It's just me." Another step. "Last warning," I said, thumb on the trigger of the bear spray. Not Ethan smiled, but the expression was all wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. "You won't use that on your best friend, will you, Marcus?" In one fluid motion, impossibly fast, it closed the distance between us. I barely had time to squeeze the trigger before it was on me. The spray hit it directly in the face, and the effect was immediate and shocking. The creature recoiled with an inhuman shriek, its features melting and reforming. Ethan's face sloughed away like wax near a flame, revealing the smooth, blank visage I had glimpsed in the forest. Its body contorted, limbs elongating and twisting at impossible angles. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, following the creek downstream at a breakneck pace. Behind me, I could hear the creature's pursuit, not the sound of running feet, but that same scuttling noise I had heard the night before. The trees began to thin, and suddenly I burst out of the forest onto a gravel road. Ahead, I could see the small parking lot where Ethan and I had left his car just 2 days earlier. The lot was empty except for his blue Subaru Forester. I sprinted for the car, praying that Ethan had left a spare key in the magnetic box under the fender as he usually did. The scuttling sound was closer now. I didn't dare look back. I reached the car and dropped to my knees, frantically feeling under the fender. My fingers found the small metal box. I yanked it free, fumbled it open, and grabbed the key inside. The scuttling was just yards away now. I stood and whirled around. Key raised like a weapon. Nothing. The gravel road was empty. The edge of the forest was still, no sign of the creature. I backed toward the driver's side door, keeping my eyes on the tree line. Unlocking the car without looking took several tries, but finally, I heard the click of the lock. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, immediately locking all the doors. As I sat there, heart pounding, I scanned the forest edge for any sign of movement. The woods looked peaceful, almost inviting in the afternoon sunlight. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I having some kind of psychotic break? No, Ethan was gone. That much I knew for certain, and whatever had taken him had tried to take me too. I started the car with shaking hands and peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying from my tires. As I reached the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There, at the edge of the forest, stood 5 figures in a row. Even from this distance, I could see they had no faces. And they were watching me go. The police found no trace of Ethan. They searched the forest for 3 days, covering far more ground than I could have in my panicked state. They found our campsite, both backpacks still there, the tents collapsed as if abandoned in a hurry. They found no evidence of a struggle, no blood, no signs of violence at all. They didn't believe my story, of course. Their working theory was that Ethan had gotten lost in the woods, and I had experienced hallucinations brought on by panic, dehydration, and exhaustion. They suggested I seek psychiatric help to deal with the trauma. I did see a therapist who diagnosed me with acute stress disorder and prescribed medication to help me sleep. The pills keep the nightmares at bay, most nights. I've researched Yellow River State Forest extensively since then. Turns out there have been a number of disappearances in those woods over the years. Hikers and campers who went in and never came out. Not many, just one every few years, easily explained away as accidents or people wandering off trail. And there are stories, local legends about the pale ones or the people without faces who live deep in the forest. Old tales passed down by the indigenous peoples who once inhabited the area, warning about creatures that could take on the appearance of loved ones to lure the unwary into the dark. I don't go camping anymore. I don't go hiking either. I can't bear to be in the woods where every shadow might hide something watching, waiting. Where every tapping sound sends me into a panic. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from somewhere just outside my apartment. And sometimes when I finally drift off into uneasy slumber, I dream of Ethan. But it's never really him. It's always something wearing his face, something with a smile that's too wide and eyes that are too empty, beckoning me to join him in the forest. And in those dreams, I always follow. My name is Marcus Holloway, and I am 32 years old. This happened in October 2023. The crisp autumn air bit at my face as I pulled my weathered Jeep into the small gravel lot at the Yellow River State Forest trailhead. I'd been planning this solo hiking trip for months, a week alone in the backcountry of northeastern Iowa, away from the suffocating demands of my marketing job in Des Moines. My therapist had suggested it after my third panic attack in as many weeks. "You need space to process your grief," she had said, as if miles of forest could somehow fill the void Emma's death had left. I checked my pack one final time. Tent, sleeping bag, water filter, first aid kit, food for 7 days, and the small urn containing a portion of Emma's ashes. 6 months after the accident, and I still couldn't let her go completely. My plan was to scatter this small part of her at Paint Creek Overlook, a place we'd visited on our second date, where we'd first said "I love you" while watching the sunset paint the valleys in gold and crimson. The trail map showed my planned route, a 42-mile loop through the most remote sections of the forest, with several backcountry campsites marked along the way. I'd start at Big Paint Creek Campground, head north past Heffern's Hill, circle around the fire tower, and then down along the eastern ridge overlooking the Mississippi River backwaters. I'd done enough research to know that cell service would be spotty at best, non-existent at worst. Perfect. The ranger station was closed, budget cuts had reduced hours to weekends only in the off-season, but I'd already secured my backcountry permit online. I signed the trail register, noting my planned route and expected return date, then locked my Jeep and headed into the woods. The first few miles were easy hiking, the trail well-maintained and marked with blue blazes. Golden leaves crunched beneath my boots, and the afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. "You would have loved this, Em," I whispered, adjusting the straps of my pack. A sudden rustling in the underbrush to my right made me pause. A doe emerged cautiously, her large eyes regarding me before she bounded away. I smiled, taking it as a good omen, and pressed on. By late afternoon, I'd covered 8 miles and was approaching my first campsite near a small tributary of Paint Creek. The site was primitive, just a small clearing with a fire ring made of stones, but it offered a view of the water and enough flat ground for my tent. I set up camp efficiently, my hands remembering the motions from countless trips with Emma. As I prepared my dinner, a simple freeze-dried pasta, an unnatural silence fell over the forest. No birds called, no insects chirped. Even the gentle babble of the creek seemed to diminish. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature, just the weather changing, I muttered to myself, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I dreamt of Emma. Not the bloody, broken Emma from the accident, but the vibrant woman I'd fallen in love with. In the dream, she stood at the edge of my campsite, her back to me, wearing the red hiking jacket I'd bought her for our anniversary. "Em?" I called out. When she turned, her face was wrong, stretched and distorted, her mouth a black void. "You shouldn't have come here, Marcus," she said, her voice somehow both hers and not hers. "They don't like visitors." I woke with a gasp, sweat-soaked despite the cold. My watch read 3:17 a.m. The fire had died to embers, casting a faint orange glow that barely penetrated the darkness. Something moved outside my tent. A slow, dragging footstep followed by another. I held my breath, heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps circled my tent once, twice, then stopped directly outside the entrance. The fabric bulged slightly as if something was pressing against it. "Who's there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly thin. No response. Just the sound of breathing. Wet, labored breathing, then retreating footsteps. By the time I'd worked up the courage to unzip the tent and peek outside with my headlamp, whatever it was had vanished. The only evidence of its presence was a series of irregular depressions in the soil. Not quite human footprints, but nothing I could identify as animal either. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. As soon as dawn broke, I packed up camp and hit the trail, eager to put distance between myself and whatever had visited in the darkness. The second day brought me deeper into the forest. The trails became narrower, less defined, and the blue blazes more sporadically placed. Twice I had to consult my map and compass to confirm I was still on track. The weather had shifted too. Low clouds obscured the sun, and a light mist hung between the trees, reducing visibility and lending an ethereal quality to the landscape. Around noon, I came across something that wasn't on any map: a small, dilapidated cabin set back from the trail. Curiosity drew me closer. The structure was ancient, the log walls sagging and the roof partially collapsed. No one had lived here for decades, perhaps longer. The door hung askew on rusted hinges. Inside, leaves had blown in and rotted to form a damp carpet over the dirt floor. There was little furniture, just the rusted frame of what might have been a bed and a three-legged stool beside a stone fireplace. Something about the place felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate why. As I turned to leave, I noticed carvings on the inside of the door, crude symbols I didn't recognize, alongside what looked like tallies. Hundreds of them, grouped in sets of 5. Someone had been counting something. Below the tallies, a message was carved in jagged, desperate lettering. "She comes at night. Count the whispers. When they stop, run." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Vandalism from some previous hiker trying to scare others, I told myself. Nothing more. Yet I couldn't help but increase my pace as I returned to the trail. The remainder of the day's hike was uneventful, but I couldn't shake a growing sense of disquiet. The forest felt different from any I'd hiked before. Older, watchful, the trees seemed to lean inward as I passed, and more than once I spun around, certain I'd caught movement in my peripheral vision. My second campsite was situated near the base of an unusual limestone bluff formation known locally as Witch's Backbone. The name didn't help my already unsettled nerves, but the site offered good protection from the wind that had picked up throughout the afternoon. As I gathered firewood, I discovered a small cave entrance partially obscured by brush at the base of the bluff. It was narrow, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and emitted a faint, unpleasant odor. I had no desire to explore it, but made a mental note to mention it to the park rangers. It wasn't marked on my map and could be dangerous for unprepared hikers. Night fell quickly under the cloudy sky. I built my fire larger than necessary, telling myself it was just for warmth. The flames cast animated shadows across the bluff face, making the limestone appear to writhe and shift. I tried to focus on my meal, a dehydrated beef stew that tasted like salted cardboard, but found my appetite diminished. The urn with Emma's ashes sat beside me. I'd been talking to her throughout the day as I hiked, a habit I'd developed since the funeral. Now I found myself silent, reluctant to speak aloud. "This place is creeping me out a bit, Em," I finally admitted, probably just spending too much time in my own head. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond my fire's light. I jerked my head up, scanning the shadows. "Hello?" I called. "Someone there?" The forest answered with silence, that same unnatural quiet I'd noticed the previous night. No nocturnal insects, no rustling leaves, no distant owl calls. Nothing but the crackling of my fire and the sound of my own breathing. Then, faintly, I heard it. A whisper, too distant to make out words but distinctly human in cadence. It seemed to come from the direction of the cave. I grabbed my flashlight, directing its beam toward the cave entrance, but saw nothing unusual. The whispering stopped. I considered breaking camp and hiking through the night, but the trails were treacherous enough in daylight. Moving in darkness would be foolish. Instead, I retreated to my tent, zipping myself securely inside as if the thin nylon could offer any real protection. I placed my hunting knife beside my sleeping pad and tried to calm my racing thoughts with rational explanations. Wind through the cave creating strange acoustics. My imagination amplifying normal forest sounds. sleep deprivation from the previous night's disturbance. None of it was convincing. The whispering returned as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, rising and falling like distant conversation. I counted them, remembering the carving in the cabin. 1, 2, 3. I lost track somewhere around 17 before exhaustion claimed me. The dream was more vivid this time. Emma stood at the mouth of the cave, her back to me again, but now her red jacket was stained with something dark that glistened wetly in the moonlight. "They've been here so long. Marcus," she said without turning. "Hungry in the dark, forgotten by everyone except those who still practice the old ways." "Who, Em? Who's hungry?" I asked. She turned and I recoiled. Her face was her own this time, but her eyes were black pits, and her mouth moved wrong, as if someone else was speaking through her. The settlers called her Hattie Divine, said she was a witch who made a deal with something older than Christianity. The Meskwaki knew better. They never built villages in this valley. "You're not Emma," I said, backing away. She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "No, but I needed a familiar face to warn you. Leave this place, Marcus. Leave before she adds you to her collection." The dream shifted, and suddenly I was inside the cave, crawling through a narrow passage that smelled of wet earth and decay. The walls pressed in on me from all sides, slick with moisture. Claustrophobia clawed at my throat, but something compelled me forward. The passage opened into a chamber where moonlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, illuminating a grotesque tableau. Arranged in a circle were objects I first took to be unusual stalagmites, until my eyes adjusted and I recognized them for what they were: human figures. Their skin turned to stone, faces frozen in expressions of terror. At the center of the circle stood a hunched figure in tattered clothing, her back to me, impossibly thin and tall. As if sensing my presence, she began to turn. I woke with a strangled cry, my body drenched in cold sweat. Outside my tent, the whispering had stopped. Complete silence enveloped the forest. When they stop, run. Heart pounding, I fumbled for my headlamp, knife, and the small canister of bear spray I carried. Something scraped against the outside of my tent, nails or claws dragging slowly across the fabric. Then a voice, cracked and ancient, yet somehow girlish. "I can smell your grief, traveler. So sweet, so fresh. Won't you come out and share it with old Hattie?" The voice was directly outside my tent entrance. The zipper began to move, pulling downward incrementally, though no hand was visible. I scrambled backward, clutching my knife in a white-knuckled grip. The zipper stopped halfway. A long, gnarled finger, the nail blackened and curved like a talon, hooked through the opening. Then another. The fingers began to pull the opening wider. I didn't wait to see more. I slashed at the rear wall of my tent with my knife, ripping a hole large enough to squeeze through, and bolted into the forest with nothing but my knife, headlamp, and the clothes on my back. Behind me, something emerged from my tent and gave chase. I heard it crashing through the underbrush, moving faster than anything human should move. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My only thought was to put distance between myself and whatever was pursuing me. The sound of running water grew louder, and suddenly I was at the edge of a steep ravine. Below, Paint Creek churned over rocks swollen from recent rains. The opposite bank was at least 15 feet away, an impossible jump. The creature's crashing pursuit grew closer. "No escape that way, grief carrier," called the sing-song voice, now deeper, more resonant. "Come to Hattie, let me taste what pains you." I swung my headlamp around and finally saw my pursuer. The sight turned my blood to ice. She was impossibly tall and thin, her limbs elongated and jointed in too many places. Her dress might once have been white but was now a patchwork of stains and tatters. Her face was the worst. Papery skin stretched tight over an angular skull, eyes sunken but reflecting my light like an animal's. mouth a black maw filled with needle-like teeth. Her hair hung in matted gray ropes to her waist. "Beautiful grief you carry," she hissed, moving closer with a jerky, inhuman gait. "I'll keep it safe inside me, just like the others." I looked at the churning water below, then back at the approaching nightmare. I made my choice and jumped. The shock of the cold water drove the breath from my lungs. The current immediately seized me, tumbling me downstream over rocks and submerged branches. I fought to keep my head above water, gasping for air whenever I could. My shin struck something hard, sending a bolt of pain up my leg, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I managed to grab an overhanging branch and pull myself to the bank, collapsing on the rocky shore, shivering violently. My headlamp was gone, lost in the creek. In the darkness, I had no idea where I was or which direction would lead me back to a trail. All I knew was that I couldn't return to that campsite. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with horror that I'd crossed to the same side of the creek, the creature's side. And worse, I'd lost my knife in the water. I was alone, unarmed, and lost. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in my leg, and began moving parallel to the creek. Logic dictated that following the water downstream would eventually lead to civilization. The night seemed endless. I stumbled through the forest, using the stars visible through breaks in the canopy to maintain my direction. Every sound, every snapping twig or rustling leaf, sent fresh adrenaline coursing through my system. Twice I thought I heard the whispering again, seeming to come from all directions at once, but it might have been the wind. Dawn found me exhausted but alive, having covered several miles along the creek. In the growing light, I could see that I was approaching an area where the forest thinned. Beyond, there appeared to be fields, farmland, civilization. My relief was short-lived. As I neared the forest edge, I spotted a figure standing motionless among the trees ahead, a woman in a red jacket. Emma's jacket. "No," I whispered, "you're not real." The figure turned and I saw Emma's face, perfect and unchanged from the day I'd lost her. Her expression was one of concern, her eyes, her normal, human eyes, filled with worry. "Marcus, you're hurt," she said, moving toward me. "Let me help you." Every instinct screamed danger, yet I found myself rooted in place, unable to run from the perfect simulacrum of the woman I'd loved. "You died," I said, my voice breaking. "I saw you die." She stopped a few feet away, her expression softening to pity. "Is that what you think happened?" "Oh, Marcus." "The car accident." "There was no accident," she said gently. "You've been sick, love. You had a breakdown after I left you. These delusions about my death. This is why I had to leave. You couldn't accept that I didn't love you anymore." Her words landed like physical blows. Confusion clouded my thoughts. Had I invented Emma's death as some kind of psychological protection? But no. I remembered the funeral, the endless paperwork, the grief counseling sessions. "You're lying," I said, but uncertainty had crept into my voice. "Come here," she said, opening her arms. "Let me show you." Something in her voice had changed, a subtle wrongness in the cadence, and as she smiled, I glimpsed something behind her perfect white teeth, darkness moving like smoke. "You almost had me," I said, backing away. But Emma never called me love. Not once. Her expression contorted with rage, the beautiful face stretching and tearing like wet paper to reveal the gaunt, horrific visage I'd seen in the forest. Hattie lunged forward with impossible speed, fingers extended into foot-long talons. I turned to run but tripped on an exposed root, crashing hard to the ground. Pain exploded in my ankle as I tried to scramble away. Hattie was on me in an instant, her cold, bony hand closing around my throat. "Your grief is exquisite," she hissed, her face inches from mine, breath like a charnel house. "I'll wear your skin while I feed on it, piece by piece." Her jaw unhinged, stretching to an impossible width as she lowered her face toward mine. I thrashed desperately, my hand closing around a rock. With every ounce of strength left in me, I smashed it against her temple. The creature shrieked, a sound that threatened to rupture my eardrums, and recoiled. Black ichor oozed from the wound. I struck again and again until she released me and fell back. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the fire in my ankle, and limped as fast as I could toward the fields beyond the tree line. Behind me, Hattie's inhuman wailing turned to laughter. "Run all you want. Grief carrier. Old Hattie knows your scent now. Your loss calls to me. I'll find you wherever you go." I didn't look back, focusing only on the open space ahead. When I finally broke free of the forest onto the edge of a cornfield, I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. In the distance, I could see a farmhouse with a truck parked outside. Salvation. It took me nearly an hour to cross the field, dragging my injured leg behind me. The farmer, a weathered man named Mitchell Cranston, found me half-conscious on his porch and called an ambulance despite my delirious protests about a witch in the woods. At the hospital in Waukon, they treated me for exposure, a sprained ankle, and numerous cuts and bruises. When I was coherent enough, 2 county sheriff's deputies came to interview me. I told them a sanitized version of events, that I'd been spooked by noises in the night, fled my campsite, and gotten lost. I mentioned nothing about Hattie. One of the deputies, an older man named Gunderson, lingered after his partner left. "You're not the first hiker we've had come out of Yellow River with stories they don't want to tell," he said quietly, "especially near Witch's Backbone." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" He glanced over his shoulder to ensure we were alone. My grandmother was half Meskwaki. She told me stories about that place, about a woman named Hattie Devine who lived there in the 1860s. They say she practiced black magic, made sacrifices to something ancient in those caves. When locals finally went to arrest her, they found dozens of missing people turned to stone in her cave. Hattie was never found. "Just local legends," I said, not believing my own words. "Maybe." He stood to leave. But the Meskwaki wouldn't set foot in that valley for a reason, and every few years someone goes missing in those woods. We find their camps, their equipment. Sometimes we find strange statues that don't belong there. He left me with a business card and a warning to stay away from Yellow River State Forest. I was discharged the next day. A park ranger had recovered my Jeep from the trailhead and driven it to the hospital, a courtesy I was immensely grateful for. As I was preparing to leave, a nurse handed me a small package that had been left at the front desk. "Someone dropped this off for you early this morning," she said. "No name, just instructions to give it to the hiker brought in from Yellow River." The package was wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was Emma's urn, the one I'd left behind in my panicked flight from the campsite. Attached was a note written in spidery handwriting. "You forgot something precious, grief carrier. Don't worry, I'm keeping it safe until you return, and you will return. They always do." I burned the note in the hospital parking lot and placed the urn on the passenger seat of my Jeep. As I pulled onto the highway heading west, away from Yellow River Forest, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw a gaunt figure standing at the edge of the road, impossibly tall and thin, raising a hand in farewell. By the time I blinked, there was nothing there but trees. I haven't returned to Yellow River State Forest. I never scattered Emma's ashes at Paint Creek Overlook. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear whispering, too faint to make out words, but in a cadence I recognize. I count them, as the message in the cabin instructed. They haven't stopped yet, but I know someday they will. And when they do, I don't think I'll be able to run far enough or fast enough to escape what follows.